The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. The eyes peer back. I've never really been that good of a person growing up. I've always skipped school, had horrendous grades, and I always had a general disregard for rules. To put it lightly, I was not going to be nominated for most likely to succeed anytime soon. My friend Molly was the exact opposite, however. She was bright, always tried in her classes, and had way better marks than me. I had to admit, I was pretty jealous, but she wasn't the kind of person to gloat and tease me for not having as good of grades as her. She sort of saw me as someone lost in their own teenage hubris and tried her best to keep me in line with varying results. At times, we were mistaken as brother and sister or boyfriend and girlfriend, and I was teased for a whole month for that. I surprisingly felt a little bad about my kind of crowd mixing in with the wrong people, but reassurance from Molly made me forget about it. One thing about me that Molly knew very well was that I liked to explore abandoned places. No matter how illegal it was, I still found myself exploring every nook and cranny of any place I could find. Unfortunately, I was running out of places that were suitably creepy for my taste. Now, when I say creepy, I mean just the occasional urban legend surrounding the place that would ultimately be disproven very quickly. The only things that I found interesting about the places I went to were the gang markings that must have been a decade old, and the occasional crackhead that couldn't be bothered to even acknowledge my existence. Either way, my town doesn't have much to offer when it comes to exploration. Something that piqued my interest was the local zoo. It wasn't abandoned whatsoever. Hell, it was the exact opposite during its opening hours. Hundreds of people bustle in and see the animals every day because it's one of the only things to do in this town. I have to admit, it is pretty entertaining to see the animals every once in a while, but the reason why I saw this location as perfect was the fact that the place wasn't completely empty aside from the animals. There's this group of animal rights activists that try to break in and release the animals from their torturous confinement. Almost everyone hates this group, and they've made more than one attempt to release them from their cages. One time they released them during the day, and it caused quite a scene. Everyone had to leave early so that the animals could be put back into their zones and cages. With all of this said and done, I decided it would be quite the experience to maybe catch one of these attempts and see it for myself. At school, I told Molly my plan and she laughed at my idea. She said that although it would be funny to see them in the act, I did have a chance of being caught by one of those lunatics, and who knows what they'll do to me. I told her that I've been doing this for a few years, so I don't think those idiots would know that I was ever there. I then asked if she could join me for the venture later tonight. She, of course, declined, but I insisted. She said that she wasn't experienced at all in whatever I do, and that she doesn't want to risk herself getting caught. I told her that even someone like her could do it, and that two is better than one. She finally changed her mind when I told her that I'll cover our butts when we get caught and tell them that it was my idea. She reluctantly agreed, and she said she needed some rush in her life at some point anyway. Later that night, we met up at a safe distance from the zoo's entrance. We wanted to see the activists going in ourselves just so that we weren't there for nothing. We waited in the dark for so long that I had thought they weren't coming after all. The only light that illuminated the place was a lone street light that lit up the bold lettering on the sign up front that read, Forest Ridge Public Zoo. We decided to sneak around the side of the park property and see if we can find a ladder on the back of one of the shops that built their back walls, bulging out of the side of the wall. As we rounded the corner, I shined my flashlight to the white backs of the buildings that lined up against the wall. That's when I noticed a hanging ladder made of thick, white-laced rope that was tightened by several knots. I guess they beat us to the punch. I didn't even see them. Did you? I whispered to Molly. No, I couldn't see much. It's really dark out here. Either way, you want to go first? Molly offered. I scrambled up the ladder and Molly soon followed. We overlooked the main entrance to the zoo and saw a little light flicker its way in different directions. I ducked under the ledge on the roof and quietly told Molly to do the same. Did you see that? I said in a hushed voice. I think so. Who was that? Molly whispered with a hint of worry in her voice. Calm down. I think that was a security guard. We need to get down to the main floor and see where these people went. I whispered with a hint of worry in myself. We were both in new territory, and I didn't know the repercussions for getting caught. I peeked over the ledge and only saw the faint shadows of the exhibits and no sign of life anywhere. The coast is clear. Follow me, I whispered as I made my way to the rooftop door that led into the store below. I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I've run into this situation many times before, so I pulled out my trusty screwdriver and my set of bobby pins. I inserted the bobby pins into the lock and felt the pressure of the springs in the doorknob release. I carefully pushed up the springs into the cylinder and felt the oh-so-satisfying click of the deadbolt being released from the rusty strike plate. I signaled Molly that the way was clear, and I carefully opened the door that led to the dark, concrete staircase that sent a pit of dread into both of us. We need to be careful down there. Not only do we need to avoid those activists, but we also can't wake up the animals, I whispered clearly and seriously. Okay, Molly whispered back with some uneasiness in her voice. We both crept down the stairs and took great care in not making any noise on the way down. As we were entering the last section of the staircase, we were met with a tight, pitch-black hallway with a checkered pattern tile floor. I took out 2 pocket flashlights and handed one of them to Molly. I clicked the button on the light, and a beam of light shone the ground below me. We can try the side door. Over here, Molly whispers, pointing to the far left of the gift shop. Nice catch, I whispered back. We made our way over to the side door and tried to quietly open the door, only to be stopped by some boxes from the outside. Damn, the boxes are in the way, I hushed in frustration. Try and push them from the inside, Molly suggested. No, I can't risk the noise. We'll need to go out the front. As we snuck to the front of the store, we heard footsteps coming to the store, and we quickly split up into the aisles of the gift store. I turned my flashlight off and hid behind a shelf that had a bunch of stuffed animals on the shelves. As I sat there, crouched behind the shelf, I saw a beam of light scan over my head. I heard footsteps slowly approaching my shelf, and I quickly switched spots and dove into another aisle. I peeked over, and I saw a black figure with a cap on. The figure shone a light onto my previous spot, and I could just see the outline of the bold lettering on his jacket reading, "Security." I stayed quiet for what seemed like hours. That is, until I heard the sound of the door opening and closing, and the footsteps fading away. I breathed a sigh of relief and slowly peeked out from my hiding spot. I looked at the window and saw nothing but the glare of the glass pane window. I looked around for Molly and saw that she was hiding under the cashier's desk. She looked petrified and felt glad that the guard was gone. I couldn't blame her. It was her first time, and these moments can get very tense. You did good. That was a close call, I whispered with some relief in my voice. You did too. He almost caught you, Molly whispered. He didn't even spot you. Are you sure you haven't done this before? I said mockingly. Oh, shut up, Jack, she said playfully. Anyway, we should probably move. We can't be caught in the same place, I whispered with caution. We quickly moved to the front door, and I looked through the glass door to see if the security guard was still around. I couldn't see much movement besides our shadows, and I confirmed it was safe to go outside. Beyond the glass door of the gift shop, most of the lights on the walkways were turned off. This was good for us, as we needed to stay in the darkness to hide much easier. We carefully crawled and hid behind the zoo benches that were spread out in between the square bushes and the tall trees that covered our every move. We eventually got to a crossroads with a wooden sign that pointed to different directions to the zoo's various different exhibits. As I was pondering on which way we should go, Molly pointed to a sign on the floor that led to the big cats section. I picked the sign up and saw that it had the activists' logo on the front. "I guess we should start here," I quietly said, looking at the arrow pointing to the big cats exhibit, followed by a little drawing of a lion right next to it. We followed the path that was enclosed by thick, jungle-like trees that had their branches somewhat sticking out of the foliage and just intersecting the main concrete path. "Geez, they should really trim these trees a bit," Molly remarked. "Yeah, they get pretty annoying when they're on the pathway," I said, with a hint of annoyance at the pervasive foliage. "What? You have experience?" Molly snarked. "Yeah, I've tripped on these damn things so many times that I lost count." "Wow, shouldn't the zoo do something about this? Isn't this a tripping hazard?" "You bet your ass it is. I'd tell you if my mom hadn't reported this place more than once. But the zoo doesn't do a damn thing about it. To be honest, I'm surprised they haven't gotten sued yet," I said with a hint of comedy embedding in my anecdote. "Wait, did you see that?" I said, leading us behind a bush. "What is it?" Molly asked with confusion on why we hid so suddenly. "That." I pointed at two mounds on the floor with two cube-shaped objects next to each other. "Do you want me to check?" I said with some shakiness in my voice. "Are you sure? Is it safe?" Molly worriedly asked. "I don't know. I'll check really quickly and see if it's safe." "Okay." I took a deep breath and gathered as much courage as I could. I got my flashlight and clicked it on. Its beam shined ahead of me, and I stalked forward into the dim path that laid before me. As I got closer, I noticed a dark red liquid was sprayed over the grey pavement, and an iron smell wafted into my nostrils. My heart dropped once my flashlight beam laid over the two mounds. The two mounds were barely recognizable as human. Chunks of flayed flesh surrounded them, and their internal organs were splattered on the concrete with bite marks on the legs, hands, arms, and almost all over their torsos. I nearly threw up at the sight of it, and I was too sick to notice that Molly had noticed the carnage as well. "What happened here?" Molly said, shocked at the scene before her. "I don't know. Did we just witness a murder?" I said, still gasping for air. As I scrambled to my feet, I noticed the two boxes on the floor with the contents spilled all over the walkway. I picked one up and saw it was a prescription bottle filled with white pills with green specks embedded inside them. Molly, what is this?" I said, handing her one of the bottles. "This looks like amphetamine pills. What are they doing with these here?" she pondered to herself. I looked to my right and saw the protective fencing and the wooden gating had been torn off. Just below the broken gate was cutting pliers and metal tins. "Molly, what do amphetamines do again?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It calms you down." "Why?" she said matter-of-factly. "What are some of the side effects of amphetamines, Molly?" I questioned, trying to lead her into what I was thinking. Her face turned pale as she now knew what I was getting at. "It makes them angrier." I sighed in frustration at the situation and threw the pills on the floor. I put my hands on my head and started to think about what we should do next. "Should we leave?" Molly questioned. "No, I don't think we can," I said with some exhaustion in my voice. "Why not?" "Because those bastards will pin this on us. We don't have gloves on, do we? If we let them do this to the animals, I can't imagine what would happen tomorrow morning. Then, when the police come and investigate, they'll see our fingerprints, and those nutjobs will pin this entire incident on us to cover their tracks." "So what do we do then?" "Jack," Molly said, throwing her arms up in distress. "We need to get some evidence that proves that we weren't involved in any way, and stop these lunatics from hurting any of the other animals. If we catch them in time, we could possibly save the animals from being under the influence of whatever this medicine is." "That sounds all well and good, Jack. But how are we going to do this?" Molly said. interested in what my so-called plan would be. While we were getting over here, I saw some security cameras. That must mean that someone is watching our every move. Now we need to find out where that is and find some footage that shows the activists entering and giving the animals the medicine. That way, we can't be blamed for this, and the activists would be screwed legally. That sounds good, but what about the animals? How do we prevent them from being drugged? Molly questioned. That I do not know. My answer did not please Molly one bit. You don't know? Then, how are we supposed to do this? Like I said, I don't know. Do you have any ideas? I said, hoping for some sort of answer. The only thing I could think of is that they're asleep, and we can take away the water they're given. Molly said with some hesitancy. I thought about it and said, that might work. Molly looked back, hopefully. Underneath a large oak tree. We sat behind rounded square bushes and peeked over at the featureless building up ahead. This should be it, I said, looking at the lack of detail of the building ahead of us. Are you sure this is it? Hopefully. The building's easy to miss, I said, looking at my watch. 2 a.m. We need to hurry before the staff come in at 6. Okay. The camera's looking away. Go. Molly and I quickly moved to the side of the building. Before we positioned ourselves, all of the lampposts were shut off all at once. They found their way to the power supply. Is that a good thing? Molly said. Yeah, I think. More cover for us. And them. Molly did not like the last part. We've got our chance. Look out for anything, and I'll try and get the door open. I pointed my light to the keyhole and started to fidget around with the mechanism inside. It was relatively strong as expected and somewhat difficult to get the pins in the right place. Eventually, after many tries and gripes from Molly about being finished yet, the lock clicked open and the door slowly opened, revealing its pitch-black insides. The room inside wasn't particularly special, only containing shelves of boxes and crates. However, an open doorway was tucked behind a large, rectangular crate. After some help from Molly, the crate revealed what we were looking for. A series of monitors plastered the back wall of the room. Several monitors and servers were seemingly working perfectly. I went over to the main set of monitors, and they all sprung to life. I clicked on one of the cameras that showed one of the exhibits, and saw something that made my face go cold. The exhibits were all empty. I tried for the life of me to see if any of the animals were still in their cages, but none of them were. I saw lions and cheetahs roaming the food courts, gorillas and orangutans fighting in the shops, jackals and foxes rummaging through knocked-over stands, and more animals outside of the exhibits. We were too late. It seemed that every single animal was affected. I looked around for any sign of the activists, and I found nothing. Then I looked at the camera that was near the office, and I saw the camera knocked over on the floor. Shortly before the camera disconnected, I saw the image of animalistic eyes looking directly into the camera. "Molly, lock the door now," I frantically said, pointing at the open doorway. Molly, not understanding the situation, did so urgently and locked the security office door. Molly was about to ask what was going on until she saw the screen and immediately understood my reaction. "Jack, what do we do?" Molly whispered, on the verge of tears. I fell silent and I didn't know what to say. What do we do? Reality set into me and I started to feel regret. We should have never gone here. I should have never brought her here. We're going to die here because of me. Molly noticed how distressed I was and started to try in her best efforts to calm me down. "We can't get those animals back in their cages. Jack, that's what we both know. What we can do is get out of here and call the police. All we need to do is leave. We just need to know how to do it." I nodded. "Yeah, we need to leave this place. We just need evidence first," Molly agreed. I looked back towards the computer and found a recording of the footage that had the activists in clear view. I downloaded the footage and saved it to a USB that was in one of the drawers. I put the USB in my pocket and started to ponder. Ideas were floating around in my head and all of them were risky. I started to pace around the room and tried to grasp at something. Time was a luxury that we can't afford to lose, and I had to think of something that we could use. "What's the plan, Jack?" Molly said quietly. "We need to leave, but with those animals outside, I'm not sure. The way we came in isn't an option at all because of obvious reasons. Maybe something in this room." I started to rummage around in the desks and found a Phillips head screwdriver tucked in between paperwork. Maybe this could work, I thought. I looked around the room for something that I could potentially screw off and found a vent opening that was just small enough to look through to the other side of the wall. I scanned the room with the flashlight and found nothing except the boxes and crates from earlier. The door that led to the destruction outside vibrated slightly in varying intervals. I didn't want to think about what could be waiting for us beyond that door. I scanned the office further and found an opening in the corner of the room. The opening was blocked by large crates and wooden pallets. I looked towards the locked door of the security room and I reached for the knob. Molly must have seen my hand and asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" "I think I just want to check something." "Are you sure? What are you trying to check?" "I saw this little opening in the back of the room out there." I gestured outside the door. "Okay then, be careful, for our sake," Molly said, opening the door and watching me creep outside towards the end of the room. I carefully moved the crates to the side, and it revealed a square opening that is big enough for someone to crawl through. "Come look at this. I think this is our way out." Molly comes over and looks into the darkness of the vent. The vent was dusty, and tiny cobwebs were sticking to the corners of the vent. "You, Jack, there's cobwebs in there," Molly said, disgusted. "Do you see any other way out of here?" I said, gesturing to the unknown darkness of the industrial closet that we trapped ourselves in. "Good point, Jack. Come on, let's move." I crawled on all fours into the vent, and Molly hesitantly followed after me. I shined the flashlight forward, which led to my elbows touching the dust-covered vent floors. I covered my arms and hands with my sweater and started to hold in the need to release the phlegm in my throat, which was waiting to be let out in a string of coughing fits. The walls of the steel vents echoed the thumps of arms and legs. I held my breath for as long as I could, waiting for something to come around the corner. Soon enough, I found the vertical lining of a cover at the very end of a short vent passageway. As I approached the vent cover with a screwdriver ready in hand, I stopped dead in my tracks as I heard the chilling noises of flesh tearing from bone. From the vent, I can vaguely see legs of an animal shaking from the tension of tearing meat from a particularly stubborn subject. Blood trickled down in a large red pool, and it leaked into the crevasse of the vent. It reached my arm, and my spine shivered from the very fate that potentially waited for us outside of this metal grate. However, my thoughts were pierced by a sharp feeling of being watched. I looked at the grate and saw eyes peering into the darkness that contained both me and Molly. Its slit pupil narrowed into a snarl. A black jaw gnawed loudly at the grate, which started to shake violently. I gripped the screwdriver as my life literally depended on it. Soon, the opening would be clear, and my opportunity to strike would arrive for only a few moments. The vent was now torn off, and its head started to narrow into the opening, and it aimed for my arm in order to pull me into the carnage outside. As its head shot forward towards my arm, I thrusted my screwdriver into the general direction of the animal. Its screeches echoed into the darkness of the helpless night. It staggered back and fell to the floor in pain. I scrambled out of the vent and looked at the creature. The first thing that caught my attention was its face. The screwdriver was buried into the creature's eye. Blood trickled down in droves, and its face alone said how much pain it was in. However, its face also showed unwavering anger and rage at whoever had done this to them. That unfortunate soul would have to wait because it had to escape. It bolted away, and a small trail of blood followed it. Molly looked at me with terror in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Molly said, with panic in her voice. I looked at my hand and saw blood running down into my sleeve. Further down my arm was a slight puncture into the cloth of my jacket. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that it didn't break the skin. "Yeah, thank God," I said, with a small sigh of relief. When I went to pick up the screwdriver, it was now covered in blood. The screwdriver shook in my hands, and the feeling of doing such a thing to an animal gave me a sharp chill down my back. "Jack, you're shaking. Are you feeling all right?" she said from behind, laying her hand on my shoulder. "I just hurt an animal. It didn't have anything to do with those activists. Should I feel bad about this, Molly?" "No, I don't think so. It attacked you, and you defended yourself. What else were you supposed to do?" "I don't know, Molly. It was drugged. It was angry. I feel like a monster," I said, fighting back tears. "Look, Jack, it's difficult to say what you're feeling right now, but now is not the time. We need to leave before one of those animals finds us." I looked down at the puncture in my sleeve. "Yeah, we should." Did you find anything?" Molly asked, leaning up against the wall. "Not yet. A lot of the exits here are very risky." I flipped through the cameras and scanned for any resemblance of some sort of exit with no luck. I sighed. "I can't find anything, Molly. Do you have any ideas?" "Well, there is the way we came in, but from the looks of it, we'd be lunch meat before we even get there," Molly pondered. I sat there in the chair for a minute and tried my hardest to think of something. "We can try and wait till morning," I said, trying to take a stab in the dark. I was interrupted by a sudden scratch at the door leading outside. That shot my idea down pretty quickly. I sighed in frustration, planted my hands on the table, and looked down at the keyboard. I was drawing a blank yet again, and I looked at the security cameras yet again. I was fully expecting to find nothing yet again, but something caught my eye. In the horrible, pixelated screen in front of me was a gap in the middle of one of the outside walls that seemingly led to the back alleys of the main entrance. "Molly, come look at this," I beckoned excitedly. "What is it? What did you find?" she said with piqued interest. "Look at that right there." I pointed at the slightly noticeable gap in the wall. "What is that?" Molly said, squinting her eyes to try and make out the low-quality image on screen. "I think that's a gap. It might be a way out." I zoomed into the gap and saw a part of a pathway that led behind the buildings. "Nice catch, Jack. How'd you notice that?" "I guess looking at the screen for a while has done me some good," I said while looking at the map plastered on the wall. "From that map on the wall over there, I think that crack is around the back of the cotton candy stand near the entrance. It shouldn't be far from here," I said, feeling in my pockets to check if the USB is still there, and thankfully it was. After gathering up the courage for the both of us, we headed into the vent for the second time, and we were a lot more perceptive of our surroundings this time. I peeked outside of the vent and saw that it was clear this time around. We crawled out of the dusty, cobwebbed vent and advanced towards the path that took us to the front of the building. I looked to the floor and saw a small trail of blood that led around the back of the cotton candy stand. A sinking feeling of dread and exhaustion started to brew in my stomach, but the thought of that path being our only way out made my ever-growing desperation for escaping stronger than the trail of blood that preceding us. We climbed onto the dumpster and squeezed our way through the crack. Before us was a long concrete corridor with several stands blocking the left side. As we walked down this long passageway, we saw something slumped against the concrete wall to the right. Upon closer inspection, we saw something that made our hearts drop. A man slumped against the wall, with intestines hanging out, and a gunshot wound under his cheek with the exit wound going out the top. His brain was splattered against the wall behind him with the blood splattering high. I couldn't take it at this point. I dry heaved and my eyes started to water. Molly looked away with audible disgust and started gagging. The worst part of all is the bold lettering on the man's jacket, "Security." I looked back at the security guard and saw something beside him. A pistol. Around 4 9mm ammo cases lay on the floor. One of those must have been for him. I slowly approached him and picked up the pistol. "Jack, be careful with that," Molly grudgingly said. "We need this, Molly. If these fucking animals wouldn't give mercy to him, what do you think they'll do to us?" I roughly said. We need to leave. There's no time to waste, Molly. We left the security guard's body slumped against the wall, and we never looked back at it. I felt bad for him. I had no idea who he was, but no one should die like that, eaten alive by those affected animals. We finally made our way to the entrance of the court. However, something made us stop in our tracks. An absolute nightmare lay before us. Dozens of lions, leopards, panthers, and cheetahs were laying on the floor sleeping. We just stood there with disbelief and absolute horror. How are we going to get to the exit now? What now? I whispered as softly as I could. I don't know. Molly shivered. We need to step around them. What? Molly whispered with shock. Can you think of anything else? I whispered, hoping for a better plan. Unfortunately, she did not. I looked around the mess of giant cats on the floor and saw a sizable gap in the chaos of tattered fur. I stepped forward and I landed my foot precisely in the middle of the gap. The problem was that it could only fit one person. I looked around for another spot and nearly had a heart attack when one of the lionesses yawned. It was still asleep. Thankfully, I found another spot and stepped further in this organic minefield. However, in this case, I'll be mauled to death instead of being blown to pieces. As I carefully stepped into the gap, I gestured for Molly to follow. She shook her head in defiance. I couldn't blame her, but it was the only way we could get across. I couldn't just talk her into it now, so I just continued on. Eventually, she started to make her way into the first gap in the path that was predetermined by the sleeping felines. As we stepped our way through the field of giant cats, I saw a metal structure that was meant to be operated by a cheery salesman that would sell the overpriced chicken legs. Now, it was shut tight by metal shutters, and a rusted sign stood as the only evidence of any sort of establishment. I looked towards Molly, and I pointed towards the structure's roof. She understood the plan, and I stepped up on the wooden counter of the structure. I held the roof and set my other foot on the sign that lay crooked on the wall. I pulled myself up to the roof and looked towards Molly at the bottom. She soon began to climb up the structure, and her foot landed upon the crooked sign. Then, a loud screeching sound emanated from the sign as the metal started to bend and break under the pressure. It then ended painfully with a loud clatter as it fell to the floor. It all took only 10 seconds, but it felt like it was 10 minutes. I looked at the lions below, and I saw the twinkle of their eyes begin to dimly shine. Slowly, more and more of them started to get up from the concrete floor. I felt like time just stopped at that very moment. It tortured me with the feeling of death waiting for us just a few feet below us. A death that would be more painful and horrific than anyone's imaginations. As the situation became more clear, I pulled Molly up to the roof as a large claw came swinging towards Molly's leg. Molly yelped, and she stumbled onto the floor of the structure's roof. I turned around and saw a gash on Molly's leg. It was bleeding quite a bit, and she was starting to panic. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around her leg to try and stop the bleeding. Molly was sobbing. Giant cats were clawing at the structure, and the exit was so close. Molly, remember when I said I'll cover our butts if anything goes wrong? She nodded with tears still in her eyes. I hate to say this, Molly, but I'm going to draw them away. This is a stupid plan, I know, but this is the only thing I could think of. Take the USB and the gun, and run. I'll buy you some time. Jack, why does it have to be you? She weakly said. I got you into this. It's only right that you get out of here safely, I said, slowly regretting my decisions up to this point. Molly stared back at me. She didn't say anything else. I looked around for something to distract them with and saw the exhibits splitting off into different sections. I then thought about what happened earlier. One of the exhibits was opened by one of the activists, and it should be enough to get inside. And with the animals out of their cages, it should be empty. I'm going to lead them to the exhibits. I'll find a place to hide and see if I can wait them out. I'll be fine, Molly. Now get ready to run! I positioned myself near the edge of the structure and looked towards the invisible pathway ahead of me. Thousands of possibilities ran through my head. Many horrific scenes of disembowelment and a lot of blood. I washed those thoughts away. Now wasn't the time to get distracted. And just like that, I jumped and ran into the darkness ahead. My feet were pounding against the cracked concrete. A tight corridor of messy bushes was constantly shifting and rustling. The animals were chasing behind and beside me. I was hoping that the branches below me wouldn't decide to get in my way now. Running through the dark has always been something that I was used to, but not to this extent. I finally reached the first exhibit, and the two bodies still lay there with their entrails spilled all over the floor. I looked to the right and saw the hole in the dark exhibit. I squeezed my way through the hole and looked around for something to cover it. I found a long piece of log sitting on the side, and I pushed hard so that the heavy log could block the hole in the wall. Just as I did that, I heard the repeated slams against the metal gate. I shined the flashlight and saw multiple rabid eyes looking directly at me. It felt weird being in a cage like this, and a bit ironic too. Now who's looking at who? I said to myself, with a bit of a smirk. The clouded sky was now slowly being covered in a bright pink. The giant ball of fire we call the sun was slowly rising above the horizon. The shadows of the animals stretch from outside, and my shadow stretches towards the end of the cage. In the shadows that have not been graced by the sun's warm embrace, one singular eye opens in the corner of the cage. I looked towards it, and a cold chill ran down my spine. A black cougar slowly moved out of the shadows with one eye still open. The other had blood dripping down from it. I knew that the thing that attacked me and dragged me from the vents, the one that tried to bite and maul me, the one I had stabbed with a screwdriver, was now in a cage with the one that stabbed them.
Me!
It prowled through the grass like I was their prey, and its one eye narrowed onto me. I tried to feel for the screwdriver, but I felt nothing. It must have fell out of my pocket while I was running into the exhibits. I looked towards the floor and saw a branch on the floor. It looked sturdy. I picked it up and held it like a baseball bat. It shook in my hands, and I felt like a poor prisoner waiting to be executed. Before I could compose myself, it dashed towards me with foam hanging out of its jaws. I aimlessly swung towards the foliage, and I felt resistance vibrate from the branch and into my arms. A heavy thunk echoed through my ears, and a growl rumbled from the grass. I backed away towards a mess of branches standing on each other and readied my branch like a batter at a baseball game. However, the fear of missing still filled my mind thoroughly. I felt its singular eye watching me from every vantage point. To the left of me, to the right, and behind me. I looked behind me and was confronted by nothing but a tangle of grass and giant roots. However, the rapid crushing of foliage drew my attention towards the left, and I was tackled to the floor with a black, furious head biting down on my branch. Blood ran down my arms, and I didn't know whether it was mine or not. Drool sprayed around me as it struggled to get past my wooden barricade that I had in my hands. I felt this trembling in the palms of my hands, and my heart started to beat at a rate I can only describe as a trembling snare drum. My vision became blurry, and the gnashing teeth came closer and closer to my neck. A high-pitched clicking sound broke my thoughts, with the giant feline falling to the floor, twitching. Two metal prongs poked out of the black, matted furry mass that lay upon the floor. A capable set of hands pulled me from the floor and led me out of the cage. The animals outside were long gone, and the front entrance was desolate. As I was taken out of the zoo, I looked at my arms and saw several deep gashes along my arms. I was taken to the hospital and had to get several stitches on my arms. The doctors saw that I had some infection in the wounds, and I'll have to treat it with antibiotics. When I got to the waiting room, Molly was waiting there with a white bandage over her leg, similar to mine. She was glad I made it out somewhat okay. It was a miracle that we made it out with no life-threatening injuries. After we left, she told me what happened after I ran for the exhibits. She said that once most of the animals cleared a path, she ran as fast as she could towards the entrance and contacted the police through the booth. When they arrived and found me, she gave them the USB that showed who exactly was the culprit. When they checked the footage, it showed the activists drugging the animals through tampered water. Later, we had to appear in court in another city. We had to tell our side of the story and leave out the sneaking in part. We just told them about how we found drugs around the back of the bathrooms and how we reported it to security. When they showed the security footage in court, the leader didn't object to anything. He seemed to think that this was justified in some sort of sick way. We weren't there long enough to hear about his sentence, but I hope he gets at least life. This was several years ago, and I've already graduated from high school and college. I finally pulled my life together and tried to stay safe. Molly and I still stay in touch, and we meet every so often. I guess I can say I lived happily ever after, and it would sound a bit cliché. However, I guess it was the case this time around, and I think a happy ending is something that everyone wants. Anyway, I got to get back on my shift. The lions need tending to. Story 2. My best friend wears a face mask. When I was in junior high, a transfer student arrived in the middle of the semester, a kid that was different from everyone else. Right away he had caught my eye. In fact, he caught everyone's attention because he had a very unique disability. He couldn't speak. I guess you could say he was deaf, though it was clear to me after getting to know him that he could in fact hear. Every word spoken to him was understood with simple nods or gestures, facial expressions contorting into understood language. So I guess he was mute. Yeah, that would describe him best. He was an oddity to most, but to me he was a unicorn. Something that sparkled in our dim, monotonous lives, and it wasn't until he revealed who he was did I become terrified of him and his shine. I was in 7th grade, maneuvering my way through the jungle of middle school, avoiding trouble and premature violence. I was an undersized boy for my age, no more than 5 tall. Puberty had yet to visit me, leaving me left out of the herd. The other students, or the sheep as I called them, that infested my school, they were all the same. Kids that were driven by hormones, constantly talking about boys or girls, their deep voices riding on the coattails of the wind that breezed in and out of our hallways. I was a mere shadow, always walking a few paces behind the others, not wanting to be seen or acknowledged. I saw what others that looked like me went through. They were tortured and abused for simply existing. Once Bryce Ellis and his friends stuck Timmy Easton's face in the shitter for over 10 flushes. I was in a stall over, hiding and waiting for the torment to be over. I slithered my feet up onto the stall, caressing them to my chest, as I sat in a fetal position, horrified of how one human could treat another. Eventually the bullies had gotten bored. Their short attention span-driven minds directed them to another endeavor, leaving Timmy to fester in his tears and possible filth. He sobbed for minutes that felt like hours as I remained silent in the stall over. I placed my hand cautiously on the barrier wall, trying to absorb a bit of his pain. My heart ached for him in that moment, and I wanted to lend him a compassionate hand if only I had the courage to do so. So yeah, I did my best to stay hidden, unseen to all the dwellers that mindlessly walked in and out of our school on a daily basis. The boys that believed themselves to be men, or the girls that pontificated to anyone that listened. I was lost into an enteral sea of vindictive young adults that searched for any reason to lash out at anyone that stood in their way. So when Tape Boy, as they would eventually call him, came to my little middle school that stood still in the secluded hills of our small town, I was enthralled almost immediately with his existence. He was introduced to my homeroom class. I sat in the back, burying my head into my arms, occasionally lifting my head to listen on the day's lecture, my daydreams entertaining me as the clock slowly ticked away at our lives, and it wasn't until my teacher promptly stopped talking did it trigger a primal emotion in me to sit up and pay attention. I postured myself up straight, pausing the internal movie that played in my mind to see what the interruption was about. There he was, a new boy that no one had ever seen before. By middle school, everyone knew each other. We had went to the same elementary school, the same holiday events and grocery stores, so getting a new student was like getting a new flavor at Baskin-Robbins, a mystery taste simmering on the tip of your tongue as you digested every drop. His presence was intriguing. He wasn't small like me. I would say average height for a 12-year-old, about 5'4", slender body with unkempt dark black hair, He looked timid, his head tilted towards the ground, not wanting to accidentally lock eyes with any of us as the teacher introduced him. My mind wandering with such intrigue, because to all of our astonishment, he was wearing a surgical face mask. Mind you, this was in the 90s, eons before the COVID pandemic breached the windows of our thoughts. Right away I could hear the murmurs, the questions erupting throughout the classroom as everyone pondered of why this boy sheltered his face. I stared on for what must have been minutes as the shy boy kept his gaze down. I could see him slightly squeezing the arm straps to his backpack nervously the longer he stood there on full display for all. I had my fill and I relaxed my posture, sinking back into my chair, directing my stare out the window, but then Billy Sherman asked the question we all had on our minds. Why is he wearing that mask? Our teacher explained to us that it was because of some weakened immune system, something about how his ticker didn't click like the rest of ours. She then also told us about him being mute. This drew my eyes right back to him. I think it did for all of us, and for a moment, the quiet kid raised his head and locked eyes with me. His dark black eyes glistened with despair. The deep purple bags that sagged under his eyes were more indicative of someone that hadn't slept in days. I felt something for him in that moment. Our third eye conversing in some cosmic dialogue, and as quickly as he rose, his head did it drop once again towards the ground. I could still hear all the other kids snickering, questioning, and some even giggling. It made me sick. If I was a braver boy, I would have stood on top of my desk and verbally lashed out to all the sheep. Instead, I rose my hand asking something. Mrs. Willis never said. What was the timid boy's name? Oh, I'm sorry. How rude of me. This is Gabriel. She sat Gabriel up front next to her desk, wanting him close in case he needed to write or sign something to her. And just like that, everyone went back to their simple lives, including myself. The next few weeks I saw little of Gabriel other than the back of his head during class. Once the bell rang, everyone that my eyes glimpsed at for the day disappeared, or just maybe it was me who dissolved into the ambience of our school. Either way, I saw little of the boy who wore a mask, the one that sheltered his true identity, and my curiosity with the new flavor of the week gradually faded into the abyss of non-existence. Well, that was until the day I saw the mask slip. It was end of the day. I spent most of the time turning corners any time Bryce Ellis approached, evading the wrath of him and his band of merry men who were the pinnacle of human torture, finding any opportunity to demean those who crossed their path. I remember leaving chemistry class, my mind all too occupied with leaving the hellhole of every kid's dread, and that's when I saw Gabriel walking down the hall towards the cafeteria, his head still tilted down, his gaze tracking every step he took, face mask still tightly fitted around his face. This time I saw someone was following him. It was Tom Ingram, one of Bryce's guys, a kid that tried to be the alpha male of the group numerous times, doing his best to dethrone the reign of Bryce. He was a big boy for his age, probably about 5'9" and easily weighed 200 pounds. He was a wild card, all right. He got caught pouring sugar down Mr. Whitaker's old Pontiac gas tank for giving him a poor grade. So when I saw him berating poor Gabriel, taunting him as grotesque laughter followed every insult, I felt like I had to do something, and my consistent stealth veneer of camouflage morphed into a full-on sprint towards the two. I saw Tom was closing in on him, other kids looking on with bewilderment on their faces, not knowing if they should laugh out of fear or grimace from disgust. For the first time in a long while, did a burning sensation of courage ignite in my soul. I was tired of seeing monsters preying on the sheep, and I was going to stop it somehow. Finally, Gabriel had stopped walking and stood still, his head hanging even lower than before. The strands of his long hair covered the remainder of his face. Tom began slapping the top side of the poor kid's head, yelling out obscenities, angered that he didn't stop sooner. I was close. I was going to stop this, since all anyone else could do is cower in fear while looking on, and then it happened, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. My eyes widening with befuddlement, Tom had torn away the mask from Gabriel's face. Pause with groans came from everyone. Then silence blanketed the entire school. and for those few seconds, our existence had been swallowed up by the earth itself. "What the hell?" Tom yelped out, breaking the still but heavy disquietude. I wanted to say something, but no words could be manifested, only gurgles as I choked on my own disbelief. The timid boy under the mask of intrigue had a strip of black duct tape covering his mouth, it stretching from the side of his face to the other, almost resembling what would be some hideous smile. The timid boy then collapsed his hands over his face as faint muffles of sobbing protruded from him. He ran into the nearest restroom only for Tom to pursue. Finally, my thoughts had been gathered while my body came back to life. I brushed off the bizarre occurrence of that grisly smile, and I reminded myself of what was about to happen. Tom was going to punish Gabriel for simply existing, as he and his gang had been doing for years, and like some old factory machine, the cogs of my body set into motion as I ran towards the restroom. Before I could open the door, the most horrid scream exploded outwards into the hallway, the sound sending a cold shiver down my spine, and Tom came running out of the restroom, gripping at his face, crying. He was hysterical, running and bumping into the walls until finally crumbling onto the floor, only to continue sobbing. My mind was clouded with a whirlwind of confusion. I no longer knew what to do. I was going to run in there and stop the assault, but now the assaulter was on the floor, destroyed. Then Gabriel calmly came out of the restroom, his mask firmly back on, and he turned to look at me, his dark eyes burning an image of anguish into my mind. I asked if he was okay. Of course he said nothing, though. He didn't need to. I could just sense his response, and it was one of gratitude. I almost could see him smiling at me from underneath the mask, and I reminded myself of what was under it, that abysmal duct tape that looked like a sinister grin. From that day on, most of the kids were afraid of Gabriel. I could see the look of terror in their eyes any time he passed by them, even though his head was still shifted downwards. But that's the day whenever someone mentioned him, they referred to him as Tape Boy. I had heard through the whispers of our school that Tom had suffered some mental breakdown, that the doctors couldn't find anything psychically wrong with him. It was as if his mind had shattered. He remained in some mental hospital, memories of him gradually fading, and the sheep went on with living their mundane lives. Bryce even slowed his bullying. I think he knew that there were now more eyes watching everyone after the altercation, and he didn't want to get caught in some bad situation, though I could see he was itching to get at Gabriel. I went back to being a shadow, avoiding all the others, still not too confident that the days of torture were over. Even though Gabriel was regarded as some magical or perhaps malevolent being by most, not sure which one, he still appeared to be sad, lonely, his head always dragging with despondency. I made an effort in getting to know him. I wasn't afraid like the rest of them. Something about the day we locked eyes gave me the resolve to understand he wouldn't hurt me. I approached him during lunch break. He was outside, sitting underneath a tree, the shade showering him a gloom of haze. I think I surprised him, or maybe it was just my stealth nature, but I saw him jump when I sat next to him. I began talking about the origins of Darth Vader, of how he was originally a hero, using his force power for good, only to eventually turn to the dark side. Gabriel just looked at me, confounded of why I was even talking to him, his stare looking on with indifference. I told him that he was like a superhero. Doing whatever he did to Tom was just like a superpower, that I was thankful. His gaze then returned back to the floor, almost out of shame. I guess whatever he did that day, he didn't see it as something special, or something to praise. I then told him that I still envied his ability to defend himself, that having such an ability was better than winning the school lottery, which was a week's supply of free cafeteria food. I kept blabbering on for the remainder of the break, while he still postured his stare towards the floor until the bell had finally rung. Before getting up, I told him that if I could have a superpower, mine would be invisibility. That's when he turned to me, pulling out a small spiral from his backpack, writing something down. He then showed me. "Why?" it read. I told him that I didn't like being seen, that if I could, I would melt away into the noise. Then life would be better. He just stared at me with what I could assume was disbelief. He didn't write anything back. He just remained seated while I stood to my feet. I asked if he was coming back to class, but he ignored me, and just stared out into space, presumably lost in his own thoughts. For the next several months, I would catch Gabriel in the hallways, talk to him about the latest edition of whatever comic I was reading, Superman being my favorite, and I would go on and on about how his true superpower wasn't strength but hope. I think he became more comfortable with me, pulling out his spiral notebook to write down his thoughts, his questions and answers. A new gateway of communication had formed between us. Most times I could tell what he was going to write by looking at his eyes. Those dark, haunting eyes. He was a mysterious book, slowly being revealed to me, and I was completely beguiled by his friendship. Bryce and his little posse slowly went back to bullying the sheep, though they kept their distance from Gabriel and me. I guess I had a new protector, one that wouldn't be crossed, and something about that protection left me feeling proud. I knew in my heart that the timid kid that now went by Tape Boy wouldn't hurt a fly, that maybe the day of Tom going crazy was all by chance. Perhaps his rage snapped his mind. I tried asking him about that day numerous times, but he never explained what happened. He would redirect the conversation back to superheroes. I would walk home with him on certain days. Well, more like he would walk me home. I never got to see where he lived. He was too reserved to give up that kind of information, but the days we would walk together was always fun. I finally felt like I belonged. The longing emotion of needing acceptance was found by his friendship. One day when I was walking home by myself, I decided to stop in at the gas station to pick up a drink and scour the latest edition of comic books in the small rack of magazines. Before entering the store, I could hear arguing voices engaging in combative dialogue, and it became vividly clear that it was more of a yelling match than conversation. It was coming from the side of the building. Most times I would just ignore it, but one of the voices sounded all too familiar, and I crept slowly to the edge of the building, poking my head out to get a glimpse of the disturbance. It was Bryce. His back was up against the wall, while someone who I presumed was his father berated him with such a vicious snarl on his face. The angry man kept slapping Bryce across the face any time he tried to say something, and soon tears began drizzling off the face of the mighty bully, only for the man to laugh. I didn't know why the older man was treating Bryce the way he was. Information cut out of my understanding. For all I know, it could have been because of something the bully did at school. I found it to be poetic justice that the boy that caused so much heartache suffered the same amount only at home. It felt like a cliché. The angry kid was angry because of the angry father. A cruel loop of never-ending proportions. Eventually, the man or father walked away, getting back into his car, leaving the bully to brush away the tears from his face. I cautiously retreated my head away, deciding to ditch the store completely, when that same broken voice only minutes ago shouted out to me with a hefty dominance. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Bryce howled out. I didn't bother turning around. I just ran home, dodging into alleyways, trying my best to not be seen. It didn't appear as if he was following, but seeing him in such a vulnerable state was bemusing. We were a small town. How could I not know who the man was? We all knew each other since we were small, and then it hit me. Bryce's dad had left when he was little. This man must have been his stepdad, or perhaps Mom's boyfriend. It didn't matter. I was going to mind my own business. I was going to slither back into the shadows, but my attempts would only fall on defeated shoulders. I didn't want to tell anyone of what I saw. I hoped that keeping my mouth shut would have been enough for the bully to leave me be. Unfortunately, there is no reasoning when it comes to human beings. We base our actions on emotions, our anger, and Bryce confronted me the next morning in front of Gabriel. "Hey, Ferry, did you enjoy the show?" the angry kid spouted out at me. I tried explaining to him that I wasn't trying to intrude, that the arguing concerned me, that I didn't like seeing him being mistreated, and then he punched me right in the gut. I fell to the floor, gripping at my stomach, the pain slicing through every fiber of my body. I tried catching my breath, but inhaling was too painful, and I sheltered my face, expecting another punch, but the bully walked off, leaving me to sweat. Gabriel kneeled down to me, taking out his spiral notebook, writing the obvious question. I gestured to him to give me a moment, and I honestly felt like crying. I had spent years doing my best to blend into the background. The invisibility power I was so desperate to have amongst the sheep was now gone. I was on Bryce's radar. For the remainder of the school year, I tried avoiding the bullies, the monsters that preyed on the sheep, but their leader would actively search for me. He was no longer intimidated by Gabriel. His once menacing allure had dwindled, and now we both were sitting ducks. Luckily, there was only a few weeks left until summer break, and I only had hoped that the time off would be enough for the monster of monsters to cool off. Entering summer was a relief much needed for my sanity. I took a few thrashings, but it was over. Me and Gabriel had big plans on spending time together. He wasn't an outdoor kind of kid. He usually would just come over my place and we would read my comic books. He quickly grew enchanted with the idea of superheroes, their powers restoring balance to the nature of our world. I enjoyed every minute of it. My parents, on the other hand, looked less jovial to our friendship. They didn't like the mask. It worried them. They thought that whatever illness he had could be passed on to me, but they didn't do anything to stop us from seeing each other. They only silently protested. So after a while, we decided to meet somewhere outdoors, away from my parents' judgmental stares. There was a creek close to my house, the trees giving us enough shade to stay cool on those long summer days. The small stream that flowed through the trenches of the creek enriched our view, as we would find the perfect rock to perch on while reading our comics. We didn't see much of any of the other classmates that summer. The sheep kept their distance, or maybe it was just us. But the days seemed to pass quickly, and before we knew it, summer was coming to an end. I couldn't remember how many volumes we must have read, but Gabriel was now a fan of almost every superhero. He tended to raise out his arms while walking, mimicking the premise of flying like Superman, his ponderous eyes cutting through the brush as we escaped our secluded summer spot. It was on the final day of our summer break did I pressure the shy, timid boy to explain to me what had happened that day. The day Tom lost his marbles. I needed to know. Gabriel has always tried redirecting the conversation, holding up a comic of Batman, pointing at some dialogue. I got upset. I raised my voice, telling him that if we were friends, then he should tell me that there wasn't secrets between us, his heavy eyes collapsing to the ground, shifting his posture on the rock that we both sat on. Look, I just need to know. You're my best friend, I told him with genuine longing. The school year was about to start up again, and I could already envision a future of slithering through the hallways, how I have always done. But with Gabriel, maybe that could change. I needed to know, and I was done guessing, fantasizing that he was some superhero, or at least my hero, my protector. I stood up off the rock, walking over to the stream. The sound of water colliding onto the small stones that infested the trench triggered something awful in my gut. I took a deep breath and made my final stand with my best friend. If you don't want to tell me, then I'm going home. See ya, I said with impatience dripping off of my words. Gabriel ignored my warning and continued pointing at the comic book. That's when I noticed what he was pointing at. It wasn't dialogue, it was one of Batman's villains. He was pointing at Clayface. This made me stop, my minding halting after speeding at 100 miles per hour, it crashing my thoughts. Yeah, what about Clayface? I curiously asked with a withered and tired voice. That's when his pointer finger was no longer on the page, but rather it was pointed towards his mouth. The mouth that was hidden behind his mask. He could see my face drop with sadness. Whatever disfigurement he had underneath that horrid black duct tape must have been something like the villain from the comic, and my heart broke for him. Gabriel's eyes gleaming with absolute sorrow. The boy that only wanted to be left alone. The person all the others feared just wanted solitude, and here I was badgering him to no end about something so insignificant. We stared at each other for several seconds, our eyes meeting in some altered state, and I reached my hand up to his face tenderly, taking off his mask. There it was, the black duct tape that resembled a grin, a nightmarish one that could only been seen in some horror movie. I then placed my fingers on the edge of the tape, my cold grip causing him to shiver, and I slowly began to remove it. "What the hell are you fairies doing?" A voice called out from the brush, one that sank my heart into my stomach. I turned, trying to locate the voice, and sure enough, there he was. The bully that had tortured so many for so many years. It was Bryce. His body slowly revealing itself from the brush, like some despicable ooze frothing from the depths of hell. Though, something about him was different. His cold stare no longer fictitious, but more intimidating, and as his body fully emerged, did I see the blood trickling down his soaked stained shirt. He was covered in the crimson fluid. There was even some on his cheeks, almost as he had some open wound and smeared the remnants of it on his face. The devilish grin that bestowed his bruised and beaten face quickly led me to a conclusion, one that I wish I didn't conclude. A purplish black infested the outlayer of his left eye. It practically closed shut, and his nose had been bent to an unsightly angle. I started to whimper as my lips trembled from fright, because this Bryce was not the same one that had given us wedgies or swirlies. This one was a true monster, a beast that devoured souls. His gaze was enough to display a vacancy of any humanity, and my eyes crawled down his arm into his hand to see the black pistol that he firmly gripped. Bryce, what happened? Are you okay?" I groaned out while sniffling. He didn't answer. He just kept grinning at me. The ghastly smile that stretched ear from ear plagued my vision, and I knew that he had done it, that he had hurt someone badly. I was terrified, and in the moment I had completely forgotten about Gabriel. My tunnel vision only focused on that firearm. "Where the hell did the other one go?" the monster asked. I turned and realized Gabriel, in fact, had run away, leaving me behind. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee while screaming, but horror kept me in place, and I felt like some deer trapped in headlights, contemplating my entire life in mere seconds. "Everyone always messes with me," Bryce yelled out with such ferociousness. There was no talking my way out of this one, no pleading. I knew in that moment he was going to kill me, his rage overflowing to the point of lunacy. He quickly pounced, dropping me to the floor, screaming with madness, and he repeatedly hit me over the head with the butt of the gun, causing me to see stars. His words became incoherent, sounding like muffled tones that slushed its way into my hearing. I shook my head, trying to collect myself. Just maybe I could figure a way out of this, but as soon as my vision corrected itself, Bryce would strike me another time, causing it to blur once again. I fell into a darkness, my world collapsing into an eternal void of loneliness as my body began to float effortlessly. But as soon as I thought this was my final moments, flashes of Gabriel flooded into my mind, awakening me out of whatever slumber I found myself in. That's when I realized Bryce was no longer hitting me. Instead, he was talking to someone, and as I grabbed at my head, trying to steady my balance, I saw it was Gabriel, standing still, head as always tilted downwards. Bryce confronted him, pointing his 9mm directly at his head, yelling, screaming at the top of his lungs. But my best friend remained unmoved, just quiet, and then he slowly removed his mask. This caused Bryce to pause, his tone weaken, and I think for the first time he digested if he should proceed doing what he was doing. "What are you doing, freak?" the bully yelped out. Gabriel remained quiet, eyes still directed towards the floor, his breathing escalating. I could see his chest pump more vigorously with each passing second. With the mask off me, and Bryce could see the bewildering black duct tape strapped to his face, Gabriel's face began to tremble violently, as if he was trying to yell through the bondage. He then finally began to peel of the thick layer of black duct tape, and it came off with a wicked screech as I could see my friend's eyes squint with pain. Bryce was no longer pointing the gun at Gabriel. No longer was he even saying a word, his arm lowered to his side, and both him and I stared on with amazement. What was under the tape was layers of skin, twisting and binding to each other like some thriving organism living its own life on Gabriel's face. I couldn't move. I couldn't say anything. I was in shock, and my head still throbbed from pain. Then Gabriel's mouth, if you want to call it that, began to stretch open. He tilted his head backwards, while the mountain of dead flesh started to drip down his face, allowing some endless void to open up inside of him. I could hear the cracking of bones breaking, his jaw shifting to accommodate the massive hole that was now his mouth, and then horrid, dwindling fingers began to protrude from the darkness. My mouth gaped open with trepidation, and if I had the ability to adjust my head, I would think Bryce had the same facial expression. Then a grotesque head forced its way out of my friend's mouth, revealing a face that could only exist in the realms of the dead. This new creature having two large almond-shaped eyes that looked very similar to the ones that were attached to my friend. This thing then stared at Bryce. That's all it did. No words were spoken, no violence was created. It just stared at him, and soon the bully grasped at his face and began to yell. He ran frantically in different directions, his gun firing out into the tree line. I jumped for cover, falling to the floor, sheltering my head with my arms. Bryce's terrified screams caused my stomach to turn, and soon those dire cries stopped along with the gunshots. I must have stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, too scared to rise to my feet, and through my peripheral did I see the sun begin to set, plunging the small creek into darkness. I eventually mustered up enough courage to get up, and I looked around. Bryce was mere feet away from me. He lay still on the floor, blood spewing out of his head. It appeared as if he'd shot himself. I walked over to his body, befuddled of what to do. I then remembered Gabriel. I turned to look for him, but he was gone. It was only me and Bryce's dead corpse. I ran home telling my parents about everything, of the encounter I experienced. At first it seemed as if they didn't believe me, but they still phoned for the police. I led them to the creek, to the bully's dead body. I initially thought perhaps they would blame me, connect me to his death, but the police believed me. Well, they believed me about Bryce, but not about Gabriel. They told me that Bryce had killed his stepfather. Apparently they had gotten into some altercation, and afterwards he went into his mother's bedroom and shot her to death. They told me that the once bully was a disturbed individual, suffering abuse for many years, that I was lucky to escape from his wrath. I told them that they needed to find my friend. I wanted to know if he was okay, but all the officers could do was pat my back with sympathy, trying to relax me. It has almost been 30 years since the event. I still have nightmares of what had happened. I see the dead stare Bryce had while pointing his pistol at me. I see him repeatedly hitting me over the head again and again. Though, what still haunts me more is Gabriel's mouth contorting into that horrid shape, revealing the creature that lived inside of him. He was never found. I'm pretty sure he moved on to another city, another place where bullies like Bryce tormented their schools, and I could only imagine Gabriel was there to balance the wrongs of the world. I'm scared of my best friend, but I know at the same time he is my protector, my superhero. He is out there doing good. I can feel it, and I hope he can sense my love for him. Maybe we will never meet again. Perhaps it's not written in the stars for us to reunite, but one thing is for sure. I get comic books mailed to me randomly every month. Most are of Superman, and I know exactly who they are from. Story 4. My journey toward the apocalypse. Before I met the Savior, I was a worthless piece of garbage, barely a human being. Lovebug droned at the front of the enormous room. Lovebug was a monster of a man, 250 pounds of hard tattooed muscle. Like myself, he was a high-ranking member of the church. His flat grey eyes scanned the room with a fanatical gleam. I sat in the first row, watching and waiting. Followers of the Savior would tell their stories, how the Savior had reached down and lifted them out of sin and filth to bring them up to the divine. The bright fluorescent lights overhead droned on with a low hum. Thousands of men crammed together in seats or stood at the back of the room. The Savior taught only 2 commandments: to murder is holy, and to die for the Savior is the highest bliss. An army of warriors followed the Savior, knights on a holy crusade, priests who wouldn't hesitate to burn the foul bodies of any witches or demons we encountered. I thought of myself as a knight for the Holy King, our Savior, the mouthpiece of the Eternal. Now, it is like the hand of God has reached into my heart and loosened all the knots there, the knots of anxiety and fear and uncertainty. He raised his black, military-style rifle into the air for emphasis. I never realized the true nature of reality before, the fact that we are living in a simulation where the final battle of good versus evil is playing out before our very eyes, and I will be on the side of the good until my dying breath. I will be on the side of the Savior and of God. The crowd roared and clapped. Men got to their feet. Sweating heavily in the boiling hot conference room, I felt the surge of energy pass through me like a tidal wave. The pure confidence and iron will of truth. Lovebug lumbered down off the stage as the savior came out from behind the red curtains, walking with the straight spine of a soldier. He wore a silky black robe that fluttered softly around him. The hood pulled back. The savior had horrific burns running the length of his body. His arms had melted folds of keloid scars, visible all the way to the tips of his fingers. His scalp had also melted, and the savior had no hair except for his eyelashes and eyebrows. But the fire that had nearly killed him had spared his face. An aristocratic visage with ferocious green eyes like those of a cat. That face seemed like it had been sculpted out of marble by Da Vinci himself. The high cheekbones jutting out over a chin so sharp that it looked like it could have hammered nails into boards. He stared out at the crowd for a long moment, his gaze unblinking. "The final battle has begun," he said in a low voice, no more than a whisper. Yet, in the deathly silence of the hall, his words rang out loud and clear. "Those in charge of this illusory world know that we see them. We see them very well. How they hide behind the curtain. They control the world economy, the justice system, every government, whether they call themselves communist, authoritarian or democratic, is no more than a puppet in their dancing fingers. When anyone tries to stand up and lead the masses of suffering people towards freedom from slavery, they are vilified by the mainstream media, brought up on false charges or killed, their bodies staged to look like a suicide. Look what they did to Jesus. And for what? For telling people to love God more than their rulers. And those who speak out today are also crucified, murdered in prisons or killed by their governments. Truth is the most precious commodity. After all, it is one that can only be purchased with blood. So what can we do? How can we fight against such evil?" There was a quiet muttering among the pale, frozen faces that stared up at the stage with adoration and love. "We can fight it by using their own weapons against them," the savior said, his voice rising in speed and pitch. He raised his fisted hands to his chest, accentuating each syllable with a back-and-forth stab of his hands. "Fight fire with fire, and pay back blood with blood. The only thing these global terrorists understand is greater levels of force. We must show them death on a scale they have never before imagined." I felt nervous as the savior delivered his message. I saw other men shuffle anxiously in the crowded auditorium, most of them having high-caliber rifles slung around their shoulders. I felt the rising violence and bloodlust in the air like electricity before a lightning storm. At that moment, I knew we would all have to fight before too long. The savior called me and Lovebug back to his office after the speech had ended, sending his squirrely assistant over to deliver the handwritten note in the savior's blocky, copperplate handwriting. For a long moment, I simply watched the crowd filtering out of the doors, heading back towards the complex where all the holy soldiers of the savior lived. Feeling dissociated and lightheaded, I followed behind the massive muscular form of Lovebug, the heavy weight of the M16 bouncing against my chest. We pushed through the blood-red velvet curtains, winding our way past stage equipment and down a hallway of pure marble. Mystical paintings similar to those of Alex Grey covered both walls, showing the inside workings of the human body through art. It was as if the painter had X-ray vision and could see the heart chakra and the countless thin vessels that spiderwebbed up to the crown. But, unlike Alex Grey's hopeful depictions of mysticism, these showed men and women being burned alive, crucified, decapitated or strangled. Dark colors composed the paintings, the dark blue of a suffocating face, the clotted red of an infected stab wound, the black of death. They captured the essence of struggle perfectly. The savior's office had a thick mahogany door with silver engravings of leaves and vines running the length of it. At the top stood a single staring eye with 12 wavy tentacles emerging from the perimeter of it. The symbol of God, who the savior had seen personally. God would sometimes speak through the mouth of the savior, always during times of great tribulation or suffering. Lovebug knocked at the door. The savior's deep voice echoed out faintly. "Come in." We entered slowly, the sprawling desk of the savior filling half of the room, He sat in a comfortable chair behind it, reclining. On the walls behind him, he had pictures of Jesus, Saint Stephen, Gandhi, Hitler, Jim Jones, Shoko Asahara, and others who he taught had fought against the world elites and been killed for it. The Church of the Final Rapture was not a church in the conventional sense. The main teachings didn't revolve around the divinity of Christ or the nature of original sin. What the Savior taught was far more profound, an illusory or simulated world where every single person could become their own Christ, could awaken to the truth and perform miracles, but only if they believed fully and followed the Savior. "Sit down, please," he said in his gravelly voice. "I have a mission I would like to discuss, and you two are the only ones competent and loyal enough to carry it out." "There is another anomaly spreading," the Savior said, staring between me and Lovebug with his fanatical emerald eyes. "It is located in a rural part of the United States, in a town called..." He glanced down at the sheet of paper in front of him. "Frost Hollow, supposedly. There are black ops sites located nearby. Secret alphabet agencies experimenting with magnetic distortion systems and creating rips in the fabric of space-time with micro wormholes. I don't think it is much of a leap to say that the anomaly was likely started, either intentionally or unintentionally, by the government as part of their research. The cleaners would like to control that power. After all, they have been sending their men after it for years, like sheep to the slaughter, expending billions of dollars researching it. If they and the US government end up being able to control the creation and spread of anomalies, they will use it to enslave the world. There is no question about it in my mind." He leaned forwards towards us, his eyes growing cold. "There is only one path forward I can see. We need to spread the anomaly, make it become unstable so the demons of hell contained within it can spill out onto the real world. Perhaps it will awaken the downtrodden masses enough to begin the final revolution. We must fight terrorism with greater terrorism, and violence with greater levels of violence. For this mission, I am sending the two of you into Frost Hollow. Your job will be to find the Titan or Titans and lead them out to the border of the anomaly. These are horrendous beasts indeed. The Church has seen them before. They are nearly impossible to kill. I want you two to go inside, bait it, and have it follow you back to the edge, beyond the veil." "What's a Titan?" Lovebug asked, his eyes flicking left and right nervously. The Savior stared at him stonily for a long moment. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, showing only the whites. All the blood seemed to drain from his face. His teeth chattered, his mouth opened, and through it, God spoke, the words pouring out like crashing stones. The voice did not sound anything like the Savior's. It sounded much deeper, more mechanical, more alien somehow. "I see you very well. I saw you when you were no more than a blood clot in your mother's body. I see you even as corpses, rotted, putrefying, crawling with scavengers and insects. I see everything, every moment of time. But in the anomaly, there are things I cannot see. For this, my holy ones must go forth. In the center of hell, you will find a rose, a bird and a stone. These will be your salvation. If salvation can be found at all, go with the blessing of Yaldabaoth." The voice cut off abruptly, the silence deafening. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. The Savior's eyes came back down, looking confused and uncertain. His pupils were dilated, and he was sweating heavily, even though it was cool and air-conditioned back here in his private office. We stared at each other across the table, a no-man's land that protected me like a shield. For there seemed to be something dark in the Savior, along with the light, and I didn't know if any man could contain that power. But there was no question of disobeying. Within the hour, Lovebug and I were on one of the Church's private jets flying to the town of Frost Hollow. The gently rolling hills of Frost Hollow loomed below us as the plane circled the small dirt airstrip in the middle of some cow farms. I looked up at Lovebug, trying to judge his stony expression. He had done many years in prison before joining the Church and finding salvation, even being the leader of one of the gangs. I knew he wasn't afraid of violence. He had never told me what he did, what tortured him so much. The Savior had told us much secret knowledge, how to find a Titan, a massive, bloated abomination that could come into being only within an anomaly, a combination of many rotted body pieces fused together in some sort of hellish black magic. The Savior had spies around Frost Hollow and the surrounding towns who had been monitoring the anomaly, watching the unstable gateways leading in and out and mapping them as best they could. We would be given a fast car, plenty of weapons and some body armor. I had no idea how nightmarish the journey would become. However, "I'm driving," Lovebug said as we descended the steps. A man in a black suit with the symbol of the eye and tentacles pinned on his black button-up shirt pulled up with a Mercedes AMG 1. It was a sleek, silver thing of immense luxury and power. The craftsmanship made it look like a work of art. I sighed, keeping my finger nervously on the trigger of my rifle as I glanced around the strange, empty town. If this thing won't outrun a Titan, then nothing will, I said, trying to break the tension. I looked at the speedometer, seeing it went up to 220 miles an hour. "Damn fucking right," Lovebug growled as we slid into the futuristic-looking leather seats. The engine turned on like a softly purring kitten. The GPS automatically turned on as well, the soft robotic voice leading us toward one of the more stable portals to the anomaly. Lovebug sped down the empty forest roads of Frost Hollow, going twice the legal speed limit the entire way. "The speed limit is only for the lowest common denominator," Lovebug said pedantically, waggling a tattooed finger for emphasis. The GPS said we would reach the gateway to the anomaly in 5 minutes. Based on Lovebug's speed, I thought it would be more like 2. Someone who actually knows how to drive and isn't drunk or high can easily do 80 in a 40. Easily. I glanced nervously at the speedometer, realizing he was going over 100 miles an hour now. The sports car hugged the tight corners of the winding forest roads with absolute precision. "Turn right onto Snake Island Road extension in 500 feet, the robotic female voice. Lovebug slammed on the brakes a few seconds later, the tires skidding and locking up. We looked around frantically, seeing no streets anywhere except the one we were on. "What the hell?" Lovebug asked. The night was crawling in by now, the darkness covering the forests like a curtain. I squinted, looking at the thick grove of trees on our right, scanning it back and forth over and over. After a few seconds, I realized there was an overgrown dirt path there with no sign. It was nearly impossible to see at night, however, and calling it a road was somewhat of a joke. "Oh, damn," I said. "They should have given us an SUV." According to the GPS, our destination was only 1,000 feet down Snake Island Road extension. The low clearance of the Mercedes was a problem as Lovebug tried to navigate the flooded forest path. Deep tread marks flooded with black. Stagnant water marked the entirety of Snake Island Road extension. But ahead, the headlights illuminated something unusual. Cutting straight across the trees and brush like a razor blade was a shimmering wall of translucent energy. It reminded me of a mirage, curving upwards in wavy spiral patterns. But it gave everything a dark, sinister covering. The forest seemed to be in constant motion as the greyish light distorted it. "Look how huge it is," I said in awe, staring up at the starry sky. The flat wall rose up seemingly forever, disappearing in the cold void of infinite space. Lovebug slowly ambled the car towards the anomaly, trying to keep the Mercedes from getting stuck with its low clearance. "You ready for this, man?" Lovebug asked in a quavering voice as we inched towards the anomaly. It was only seconds away now. He grabbed my shoulder. "This is it. Remember the commandments." I closed my eyes, concentrating my heart on the Savior's words. "Dying for the good is the highest bliss," he had told us. "Let's do this," I said, my eyes flying open from my silent prayer as the hood passed through the anomaly. It disappeared in front of our eyes. We could see the forest on the other side, but the Mercedes looked like it was going through some sort of teleportation portal, being ripped apart layer by layer and sent somewhere else. Lovebug nervously grabbed my hand. For the Savior and for the good, he whispered as we passed through. I heard screaming and wailing, full of agony and unimaginable horror, like the screams of those burning in hell. My vision went white. A carpet of morphing dark colors covered everything as the shrieking intensified, until I thought my eardrums would explode. "Stop!" I cried, feeling the pressure in my head like a splitting migraine. "Stop screaming!" I started kicking, punching, trying to get away. "Calm the fuck down," someone whispered, slapping me hard across the face. Stunned, I looked up, seeing Lovebug holding me down in the seat. He was covered in sweat, his face a blank mask of terror. "Don't scream. There's things outside that are looking this way." I blinked fast, my senses coming back to me. I felt like a man waking up from surgery, confused and disoriented, my memories only returning in small trickles and drops. We were sitting in the Mercedes on a road that looked like it had been made of human skin. The headlights showed the ragged patches of pale, leathery flesh sewn together with black thread. The road disappeared ahead of us in a straight line. The land here looked as flat as Kansas, like a mirror world. It had houses and restaurants and churches lining both sides of the road, but they were all wrong. The stone church looked like it was constructed of some kind of red volcanic rock. Baphomets and upside-down pentagrams covered the outer walls, engraved deeply into the glossy surface. Mutilated bodies covered the front lawn, impaled, crucified, skinned alive or burned at the stake. Hundreds of men, women and children lay dead in front of the satanic temple. Overhead, the sky bubbled and frothed with red clouds and constant explosions of blue lightning, like missile flashes. The lightning illuminated the world around us, shining brightly before going dark. The incessant strobing gave the entire place a kind of circus freak show vibe. Many of the homes looked like they had been constructed from bones and covered in human skin, like some sort of hellish teepee. Arm and leg bones wrapped in razor wire formed the pillars. Grinning skulls lined the top of the flat. Rectangular roofs, thousands of bleached human heads staring down. Staring out of the dark doorways, I saw gleaming, silvery eyes. They loomed 8 or 9 feet in the air on spidery bodies. Their limbs looked as thin as bones, jet black and dull. The only color from these still revenants was from their unblinking eyes and grinning mouths, where teeth like those of a dragonfish jutted out. Every pair of eyes on that street was fixed intently on the Mercedes, the sick rictus grins on their alien faces never faltering. "Jesus Christ." "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling weak. I thought I was in a nightmare for a minute there. Lovebug shrugged his massive shoulders. "Yeah, I felt it too, though I came out of it a lot faster than you did," he said, glancing over at the satanic church as we passed. It had protective black spikes rising high into the air all around it. The broken body of a child who had been burnt at the stake stood in front of the gates like a death omen, his small, withered hand holding a black rose. Lovebug choked. Retching, he nearly rolled down the window, until his eyes met the silvery ones of a nearby abomination. "What's wrong?" I asked, looking closer at the church. On top of the roof, I saw an enormous statue of a black raven. Its wings spread as if it were flying. It had 3 gleaming, silvery eyes embedded into the dark rock. "That boy just reminds me of my son," Lovebug whispered glumly, inching along the streets. "I didn't know you had a son," I said, surprised. Lovebug had never mentioned a family. He shrugged. "I don't. Not anymore. I killed him. I got drunk and high one night back when I was selling drugs. Fell asleep in the living room with a lit cigarette and burned down the whole house. I killed my wife and son. Burned them. They sent me to prison. But what did that matter? The prison up here is far worse." He tapped the side of his temple. I was about to say something, but at that moment, many things happened at once. Lovebug was staring at the corpse of the child when an inhumanly long arm reached up from the side of the car. It had fingers like spikes, as sharp as a knife and twice as long as normal human fingers. I gasped, a warning shout welling up in my throat, but the hand came smashing down into the driver's side window and grabbed Lovebug's neck. The window exploded in a shower of safety glass, shattering like brittle bones. Lovebug's scream was cut off as he was dragged, kicking and screaming. Out of the car, I swung open my door, leaping out and bringing my rifle around. The Cheshire Cat grin of the abomination never faltered as it held Lovebug in front of its body like a human shield. Holding him by the neck above the ground, Lovebug's legs kicked and squirmed, his face turning blue as he slowly suffocated. His eyes bulged from their sockets, panicked and rolling, uncomprehending in their total animal panic. I flicked on the laser sight. It danced over the ground, flashing over the body of Lovebug and the abomination, but I couldn't aim for its torso or face, as I would probably hit Lovebug in the process. It was far too close. I aimed for the monster's thin, skeletal feet, the black toes twisting over each other like the roots of a tree. The gunshots rang out as a deafening counterpoint to the thunderblasts. The monster gave a hissing gurgle as 2 bullets caught it in the right ankle. The creature seemed bloodless, and only dust and ashes rolled out of the exploded insectile flesh. It tried to skitter away, but its destroyed ankle caused it to fall forward, throwing Lovebug. His body rolled across the road, the soft leather that looked like it was made from tens of thousands of human skins. Gasping, his lips still showing a faint blue cast, he struggled to crawl away. I saw furtive movement from all around us. The creatures in the houses and doorways were moving forwards, drawn by the bloodshed or noise. Hundreds of glowing, silvery eyes surrounded us. I sprinted forward, dragging Lovebug to his feet. The church, I hissed. It's the only place. Still pulling the weak, confused Lovebug behind me. We staggered towards the black gates. They opened with a shriek of rusted metal. The creatures stopped at the gates to the blood-red church, simply staring at us like statues. They didn't even seem to breathe, their lidless eyes never blinking, the silvery glow never fading. I think this is the place we're meant to go, I whispered as we made our way towards the massive pointed doors. When God spoke to us, he said something about a stone, a bird and a rose, that we would find the Titan through that. I pointed back at the burnt body of the boy. He's holding a rose. On top of the building, there's a bird, and the church is all stone. Maybe this is the place where God wanted us to go all along. Maybe, Lovebug muttered through heaving gasps, still grabbing at his bruised neck. God, this hurts. It feels like I got hanged. Side by side, we pushed open the doors to the satanic church and walked inside. Row after row of pews stretched out in front of us. Thousands of black candles were set up all around the perimeter of the enormous chamber. They sputtered and flickered constantly, throwing dancing shadows in every direction. A small pair of bright eyes glanced up at us from under one of the nearby pews. I nearly jumped out of my skin, pointing the rifle at them and yelling, "Show yourself! Come out now, or I shoot." Lovebug looked at me, confused. He hadn't seen it, but a few heartbeats later, a little girl crawled out, her eyes big and blue, her body an emaciated wreck. She wore ripped strands of what looked like leathery human skin to cover herself, tied together with black string. In one small, grime-streaked hand, she held a half-eaten raw mouse. "Please, don't kill me," she said in a small voice. "I'm Emma. My mommy and daddy got dragged away and I'm scared." I felt sick and weak looking at this small victim. I reached down and helped her up. "I wouldn't hurt you," I said, kneeling down to her level. "I thought you were one of the bad guys. This is Lovebug, and I'm Jack." "This isn't part of the mission." "Man," Lovebug said nervously. "What are we supposed to do with her?" "Well, we can't just fucking leave her here," I whispered back. "We need..." But I never got to finish that thought. Because, at that moment, the church woke up. A red glow started at the front of the chamber, the altar where the priest would have stood and given speeches or Holy Communion. Here, they had a podium that looked like it was carved from a single block of obsidian. Reflected in it, I saw the screaming faces of people burning in hell, grinning demons ripping off strips of human flesh and spiraling waves of flames. all sculpted by an artist who was able to capture the most minuscule details of agony and torture. I looked around, realizing Emma had gone. I hadn't seen her scurry away and hide, but her absence gave me a feeling of crushing dread in my chest. Lovebug. Something's wrong, I whispered, still staring up at the altar. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I glanced back just in time to see a man wearing full SWAT gear. I caught the flash of a pistol coming down, the butt aimed at my forehead. I heard the cracking, felt the immense pressure and pain. For a few moments, I swam in the currents of consciousness, trying to stay awake. But then the blackness crept in and stole me away. I awoke suddenly, my hands tied so tightly behind my back that I couldn't feel my fingers. I felt sick and wanted to throw up. I quickly choked those feelings back down. I tried to shake my head, to clear it, but that just brought jolts of pain like electricity shooting through my skull. Nearby, I heard a gunshot, then another. "Bring it." "Fuckers!" Lovebug screamed in an insane voice. The explosion of a grenade rocked the building, and I smelled choking black smoke. I opened my eyes, seeing 3 men in SWAT gear laying dead, their bodies scattered haphazardly around the chaotic scene. One wall of the church had blown outwards, the stone still sending out grey wisps of wavy smoke into the air. I looked at my partner, seeing he had a bullet hole in his left arm and another one in his stomach. He was bleeding heavily, but the adrenaline and insanity seemed to keep him afloat. For now, at least. I saw something walking towards us from the stage. It looked like a small boy, but black shadows spiraled up around his chest and face, translucent and shimmering darkly. He looked about 5 or 6, his skin pale and smooth. As Lovebug's face grew slack and distant, the boy abruptly erupted into flames. "Don't kill me again, Dad," the small boy whispered in a hoarse voice choked with pain. The flames rose from his head and skin, melting his flesh, blackening it. Drops of boiling fat dribbled off his nose and chin. "Don't send me to the dark place again, Dad." He continued creeping closer to Lovebug, moving like a lion stalking an antelope. Lovebug cried, his face going paler. Tears streamed from his eyes as the rifle trembled wildly in his shaking hands. For a long moment, he looked torn, the finger tightening on the trigger as sobs escaped his chattering lips. "Kill it. Lovebug," I screamed. "Don't let it get to you." But as he dropped the rifle and knelt before the small boy, I knew it was too late. The shadows spun faster and faster around the burning, dying body of the boy. He gave a scream of soul-shattering agony, reaching out to a small hand towards Lovebug. "Help me!" the boy cried. Lovebug hesitated before bringing an arm up to take the boy's hand. "I missed you, Robbie," Lovebug said before his fingers brushed the boy's. The boy lunged forward, grabbing Lovebug's hand with an iron grip. I saw Lovebug's eyes widen in shock and surprise. A moment later, I heard the bones in his hand grinding together before breaking with a sound like snapping tree branches. The boy's eyes darkened into jet-black orbs, the melted lips splitting into a sadistic grin. "I missed you, too," the thing hissed as its right arm changed, melting and reforming into something black and blade-like. The insectile limb swung forward in a blur, coming straight at Lovebug's heart. He gave a panicked squeal a moment before it hit, trying to pull away with all of his considerable strength, his face turning chalk white as the shattered bones in his hands ground together. I closed my eyes, rolling away, trying to undo the knots that held my hands in place. Lovebug must have been greatly outnumbered. He would never have let that man tie me up. I heard the sounds of tearing meat and crunching bone nearby. Lovebug's final breaths gurgled through the air, but I still kept my eyes closed. Not wanting to look, I felt a small tickle on my wrists, then heard a little voice next to my ear. "I'll get you out of here." I waited a few moments, then I heard the rope snap. I looked back, seeing her holding a piece of sharp, broken glass in one tiny hand. In her other, she had the car keys. I wondered how she had gotten them. The little pickpocket. "Thank God," I said, rubbing my wrists. I looked around for my rifle, seeing it was laying next to the body of one of the SWAT guys. I wondered who these men were. I crawled towards it slowly, not wanting to draw attention. "Don't move another step," a voice growled behind me. I glanced back, seeing the small boy, his features morphing into those of a demon. Curving horns spiraled from his temples. His jet-black eyes stared down at me with hatred and coldness. "You'll follow your friend who killed my servants. His soul will stay alive forever within my body." A sickly thing wrapped up in an eternal shriek. "Fuck you," I cried, lunging for my rifle. Emma disappeared behind a pew, running on all fours without looking back. I spun as I hit the ground, turning the barrel towards the morphing face of the shapeshifter. Its jaw unhinged, a snake-like tongue flicking out as it flew through the air towards me. Hollow fangs dripping clear venom grew from its mouth in a heartbeat, elongating and sharpening before my very eyes. I fired twice, the bullets entering through its mouth and coming out the back of its head. Its flesh disintegrated in an instant, the body turning into light, grey ashes that disappeared in the breeze. Breathing hard, I waited, wondering if it was all over. I heard a rumbling far below me, as if an earthquake was starting. A moment later, the church floor exploded upwards, sharp rubble and splintered boards flying in every direction. "It's coming!" Emma screamed, running over and grabbing my hand. I lay there, shell-shocked and unmoving for a long moment. In hindsight, the girl was a natural-born survivor with much sharper reflexes than me. It was likely the only reason she survived as long as she had. "The Titan," I whispered grimly, trying to pull myself up to my feet, but it was like trying to walk on a heaving, sinking ship. Parts of the floor collapsed down into a seemingly never-ending abyss beneath us. Near the stage, I saw hundreds of long, pale arms pulling something bloated and monstrous out of the ground. It was a Titan, and no explanation can ever convey the true horror of that thing. It looked like countless human corpses had been melted together, fused into a ball with sagging, boneless chests, deformed faces and millions of writhing maggots. It groaned and gurgled with many lungs, exhaling a rotting, sulphurous breeze that made me want to retch. A soft susurration of many pained, muttering voices continuously emanated from the Titan. "Emma!"
"Run!"
I screamed, but she was already sprinting back towards the front door of the church. I backpedaled, afraid to look away from the creeping monstrosity, the juggernaut of rotting flesh moving towards us. I heard the Titan closing the distance as I sprinted through the front door. The abominations with the silver eyes still slunk around the gate. Blocking the car, I raised the rifle, firing blindly at the creatures, careful not to hit the little girl. "Go to the car!" I screamed at Emma, feeling around for the keys. As the abominations saw the Titan, those still alive scattered, moving in a blur back into the shadows and homes of this rotten place. The Titan broke the front wall of the church, sending splinters of red stone flying in every direction like bullets. It groaned and gurgled faster, its sickly cries more insistent. I ran to the Mercedes, starting it up and pressing the accelerator to the floor. I pulled a U-turn, heading back to the border of the anomaly. The engine roared, the car bucking like a wild stallion as it pressed me and Emma back into our seats. But the creeping Titan continued gaining speed behind us, and for a few seconds, I feared we would be crushed to death under its massive weight. The anomaly shimmered ahead of us. I crashed through it at 200 miles an hour, skidding wildly as the Mercedes hit the dirt road. I nearly flew into a tree. I managed to right it at the last second, pulling onto the paved street as the Titan broke through behind us. It followed us out. It's in the real world now. Story 5. The Red Hive. I used to make videos, not to a large following, just little interesting clips about life in a small town and the various people who live there. It wasn't just content for the sake of content. It was a record to show what life was like in the 2020s for the folks of Tomskog, Minnesota. I'd done a couple of videos already. One was about the old couple running the corner pub. One was about a landlord, and another was about the principal of the local high school and their apparent pool troubles. Long story. I was doing a shorter video about a woman named Marla. She was a beekeeper who worked with moving intrusive hives. This kind of content gets a lot of views, so I figured I'd do a more compact but better edited video this time around. I'd done my research, prepped my gear, and was rearing to go. I met Marla on a Thursday morning in late May. We took her pickup, had a gas station sandwich for breakfast, and stopped for a quick coffee. I talked to her a bit about her job, her life, and her aspirations, small town stuff. She was the kind of woman who was happy as long as she could keep up with her payments and have a bit left over for a Netflix subscription. Wholesome. She drove me out to the site of the day, talking to the camera as we went. We were turning further and further off the paved roads as the suspension struggled against weeds, rock, and gravel. There's a hive near a walking trail, Marla explained. A couple of folks called in about their dogs getting scared. It should be fine, but we're gonna gear up just in case they're mistaken. You expect us to get stung a lot? I asked. Not really, she smiled. Not if you know what you're doing. But there've been times when folks have called in about a hive and it turned out to be paper wasps. Not as pleasant as honeybees. No, she laughed. No, they really aren't. We passed through a section of trees that covered both sides of the road, the branches hanging low enough to scrape the hood of the car. Emerging on the other side, a field opened up to our right, a large, wide-open field, covered from end to end in blue sunflowers, a local variety that is, apparently, sort of rare. I asked Marla about them. The blues? Yeah. They were introduced as a sort of gimmick back in the 1930s, I think. 1940s, maybe. They're actually quite invasive. I'm surprised there aren't more of them around. But bees can make honey on them. I guess. She nodded. They're just sunflowers. Have you tried it? Is it blue? Can't say that I have. She laughed. But I'm sure it's fine. Ordinary sunflower honey is fantastic. Kinda earthy. We got out and suited up. It felt like putting on a tent. Marla shared some interesting bee factoids that I didn't manage to catch on camera, but I made a mental note to ask her to repeat it later. Of course, I wouldn't. I'm kind of forgetful. I hadn't seen a single bee yet, but Marla was already heading out into the field. The sunflowers reached about waist high, and there was this strange, almost chemical smell in the air, sort of a mix of chlorine and ammonia. As we got further out, Marla pointed out a couple of flowers to me. Right there, she said. Get a clip. I zoomed in, spotting two bees chilling on a blue sunflower petal. They were just sort of sitting there. They had a slightly more reddish tint to them than I expected. Marla didn't seem to mind, or notice. It didn't take long before we got to the hive. I immediately started filming as we approached. The buzzing got louder as bees started to poke and prod at my defenses, curiously checking for gaps in my gloves and neck. Thankfully, Marla had helped me secure it. Still, the buzzing kinda gave me the creeps. Never been a fan of bugs. Yeah, all right, Marla laughed. No wonder there are bees. Someone set this up. It was a man-made hive, framed with sheets of mahogany, a series of wooden squares with hollow cork pipes lining the inside. The bees had really taken to it, transforming it into a sturdy hive. We usually call these bee hotels, Marla said. Some kind-hearted local set it up, but as this isn't private property, we have to take complaints into account. I'm going to make sure we move it to a better location with more nutrition for our free bee friends here, where they won't spook any dog walkers. And of course, we're keeping the hive. Someone put a lot of thought into this. I got a nice video out of it, how she unsecured the hive, moved the sections one by one, and pointed to interesting pieces for the camera. She found the queen and scooped her up in a separate container. Marla stopped for a moment, though. Apparently, the queen was larger than she'd anticipated. I didn't really have a frame of reference, so I had to take her word for it. We wrapped the hive up under a tarp on the pickup and made our way back to Marla's property. I was afraid all the bumps in the road would shake the bees loose, but they seemed perfectly content. I guess it helped that Marla was a very calm driver. Despite some curious bees making their way inside the cabin, we still had the suits on. Luckily, there was a cute hand-painted sign of a bee as we entered Marla's land. When you live in the middle of nowhere, most folks can get away with owning more land than they need, especially if they don't mind having spotty internet or a fair drive to the nearest supermarket. One look at Marla showed that she didn't mind either of these things. We took some time offloading the hive, finding a good spot on the eastern side of her property. There were plenty of wildflowers for the critters to feast on, and Marla seemed confident in her choice. There wasn't much more to it. We set it up, captured a couple of finishing thoughts, and called it a day. As I packed up my gear and took off my suit, I got a moment to speak with Marla without the camera. She was excited to have a new hive, but there was something about her expression that seemed a bit off. I'd love to try some of their honey. I said, I think it'd make a great end to the video. Yeah, I'll keep in touch. She nodded. There was an oppressive silence as she stared into the distance. I tilted my head, trying to catch her attention. You all right there? I asked. Yeah, she nodded. I'm just anxious. New responsibilities. You know. Is there a problem? She bit down on her lip, squinting. Maybe. A couple of days later, I started getting updates. Marla was having some trouble with the hive. It was more aggressive than she'd previously thought, and a lot of the bees had been dying off at alarming rates. It happens when you move them sometimes. She sighed. It's rare, but it happens. They can have trouble adapting. She managed to get a little honey, but she wasn't too happy about it. Apparently, it wasn't as sweet and sugary as she thought it'd be. There was just something off about it, texture-wise. She was going to make me a little bottle of it either way, for the video, but she advised against eating it. Returning to my day job, I was looking forward to hearing more from Marla. Out of all the people I'd worked with, she'd been the most eager to contribute to my channel. We kept in touch over the week, discussing future collaborations and other ways we could make content. She suggested making a couple of DIY videos to showcase some neat tricks for would-be hobby apiarists. The following weekend, we met up again, another early morning, this time with a light drizzle spattering against the hood of her pickup. The moment she came around, I could tell something had happened. She had these bright red spots on her arms, and she was a lot less talkative than usual. Before I got the chance to talk to her about it, she explained. Got swarmed yesterday, she said. Never happened before. Those are all stings? That's just the thing, she scoffed. It isn't. They're bites. I didn't think honeybees bit people. They don't. We just looked at one another for a moment. Her marks were pretty nasty, some of them swollen enough to burst. The conclusion was obvious. These weren't ordinary honeybees. We made our way back out to the field where we'd found them. I did a little filming, but Marla was self-conscious about her arms. She was scared that it might dissuade people from working with bees, and she kept repeating how it was her fault for not handling them correctly. She said it so many times I couldn't help but to feel she was trying to convince herself rather than me, or an audience. We made our way out into the field. Marla flipped open a pocket knife and bent down to check on the flowers. Cutting one off at the stem, she examined it for a moment. She held it up for me to see for myself. I looked it over but couldn't see anything strange, apart from the obvious blue color. You gotta touch it, she said. Check it. So I did. As soon as I touched it, a few petals came loose. The flower was clearly dead and dry. Checking out a couple more, we came to a startling realization. The entire field was, in fact, completely dead, bone dry of pollen and sustenance. And, according to Marla, it must have been dead for months. I didn't really understand why that was such a big deal, because Marla explained. The hive flourished out here, in the middle of the field. If they couldn't survive here, they would have migrated, but they didn't. So what the hell have they been eating? Whatever it was, it's what must have made the honey taste weird. Not just taste, Marla said, shaking her head. The smell is the worst, like stale bacteria and methane. Things started to fall into place. Whatever they had been eating out here in the field wasn't available at Marla's place, hence why they had been dying and getting more aggressive. Getting back to the pickup, Marla was deep in her own thoughts, drumming her fingers on the dashboard. She couldn't figure it out. I tried to cheer her up with a pat on her shoulder, which caused her to flinch a little. I probably poked a bite mark. Sorry, I said, but you know, maybe that's why they swarmed you. What do you mean? Well, maybe they tried to eat you up, I chuckled, pointing to her arms. Bees don't do that, said Marla, her face stern. I know, I nodded. Sorry, bad joke. But I could tell I'd planted something in Marla's thoughts, something that worried her. She explained that there was indeed a kind of bee that was carnivorous.
There was a type of bee called the vulture bee that fed exclusively on meat.
Mostly carrion, though. They weren't active hunters. They couldn't be, as they were stingless. You think these might be vulture bees, then? I asked. She explained. Can't imagine them just, popping up. And even so, they wouldn't be this aggressive. Would explain the honey, though. Marla's face went pale. Had she been eating meat honey? I decided to hold off on posting my video. This was turning into something more interesting, and I wanted to see it through. I filmed a couple of shots where Marla got to explain the intricacies of vulture bees. She did it in the frame of an interesting fact, rather than a suspicion, but I could tell something had changed. She wasn't as certain anymore, and a bit of eagerness had run out of her. There was a tangible worry there. As we went out back to check out the hive, Marla stopped. Her eyes widened. Turn off the camera, she hissed. 3 dead pigeons, covered in bees. From that point on, I was fully invested. This was something neither of us had seen before, unfamiliar ground. It didn't take long for Marla to confirm that the honey she'd harvested did, indeed, contain a meat protein. After that, it was just a matter of observation. Yes, the bees ate flesh. They bit instead of stung, but they weren't vulture bees. These were larger, more aggressive, and had a wider abdomen. Their mandibles were longer, and they had a slightly reddish tint to them. It was difficult to tell whether the color was a result of mutation or blood. The dead pigeons were stripped to the sinew in surprisingly little time. Marla didn't know what to do. She'd been working with preserving bees since she was a teenager, and this whole situation was testing her. She didn't want to just kill the hive, but she couldn't let them spread either. These could be highly invasive. But she took too long to decide. Just a couple of days later, 2 of the other hives on her property had been completely decimated. The red bees had killed and devoured all of them, leaving only empty chambers and hollow carapaces behind. When Marla FaceTimed me about it, she couldn't hold back the tears. By now, I considered myself a friend of hers. We'd talked a lot and got along really well. And it wasn't just about content anymore. I didn't want to see her like that. She deserved better. I offered to drop by and brainstorm a bit. I figured she needed the company. She'd done at least 24 of these bee rescues, and the one time someone came to cheer her on, it all went to hell. That had to suck. So I dropped by one day after work. The sun was setting, dark clouds on the horizon. I noticed them the moment I stepped out of my car. A handful of red bees climbed the white picket fence outside Marla's house. A few others were clustered in a particular spot near the edge of the house, no doubt feasting on a small bird or a rodent. I went up to the door and rung the bell, ducking from a couple of curious bees trying to make themselves comfortable in my rough post-work hairdo. Marla invited me into her kitchen, offering me homemade lemonade. She had these custom-made coasters with cartoon bees on them, along with the logo for her rescue. I could tell she'd taken a couple of sudden precautions. There were tape lining the edges of the windows, as well as a plastic sheet covering the ventilation duct. No wonder the air felt stale. No one knows what to do, she sighed. I called the Wyatt brothers. Southbound AP. They can't even believe it. They actually don't believe that I have what I say I have. And what is that? What is it you have? She sighed, scratching her eyebrows, a kind of nervous tick. There's no name. But, I know what they do. I know now. They're like the vulture bees. But she threw her arms up in surrender. I could tell she was tired. One of her eyes drooped a little lower than the other. Might have been from a bite too. Marla spent the better part of an hour showing me websites, witnesses to similar bees, drawings, and descriptions. She talked about the application of pesticides, mutations, climate change, GMOs, and microplastics. Hell, at one point, she was bringing up 5G towers as a possible culprit. She was all over the place, and I could tell her heart wasn't in it. It was all just desperation, grasping at straws. After a couple of hours, well into the dark of the evening, we'd gone from homemade lemonade to lukewarm, well-nursed beers. We'd run out of ideas and topics. Instead, we just stood by the kitchen window, watching the red bees crawl across the glass. Marla put down her bottle, this time without using one of her cartoon bee coasters. "Check this out," she said. She placed her hand on the window, and the bees outside immediately swarmed to it. Within seconds, there was a cluster of at least 40 crowding around her hand, on the other side of the glass. "Give them a minute," she continued. "It's kinda crazy." They started to move in a pattern, a sort of pulse, moving counterclockwise from a perfect circle into a four-armed spiral. Their wings pattered in unison, a buzzing noise that scratched against the window pane. "I can't explain that," she said. "I can explain following my hand, or killing other hives, but that?" She shook her head, not looking away. "I can't explain that." It got a little bit too late, and I'd had a couple of beers too many, so I decided to crash on her couch. I wrapped myself in a blanket and pulled a pillow up to my ear, so I wouldn't have to hear the buzzing outside. It wasn't loud, but it was such a distinct sound that I couldn't unhear it. Marla didn't seem to share the same issue, though. She just walked into her room and that was that, out like a light. I had an uneasy sleep, falling in and out of surface-level dreams. I remember forcing my eyes open just to see if I could. I was uncomfortable, and I couldn't stop hearing that buzzing noise. Even when things were quiet, I kept imagining myself hearing it. I'd see little black spots on the windows as they landed and disappeared, looking for a way in. Somewhere in the early morning hours, I was finally out cold. I didn't notice those first few sounds. How the tapping against the window got louder, how the patterns got bigger and clearer. I was finally asleep, and it was already too late when I woke up. I was lying on my side as I popped open a single eye, only to see a red bee on my hand calmly brushing itself clean. I didn't notice the droning noise at first, until I realized the background noise of the room was different. Looking beyond that first red bee, towards the window, I realized something. The pattern of bees was on the inside of the window. There were hundreds of bees already inside the room, but the sound was closer than that. It was all around me, and somewhere in the background, I could hear a breeze. Was the front door open? I tried to stay completely still, but I could feel something in my chest tightening. I wanted to brush the bee off, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Something was holding me back, keeping me from just waving my arms around and getting out. There was something more to this. Seconds later, there was a noise, a rising murmur, like a moving mass. Best way I can describe it is a vibrating burlap bag followed by meaty footsteps. Not loud, but not quiet either. Someone didn't care too much about waking me. If there was ever a time to get up, to run, or to fight, that was it. But all I did was lie there, staring at that one red bee on my hand, listening to something slowly approach from behind. It's as if I knew how badly outmatched I really was. I could feel something shift as the side of the couch was grabbed. creaking noises as fingers dug into old leather. Snapping sounds, sinew and muscle stretching and realigning under a thin layer of skin, forced breathing and hissing descending on me from above. Little sniffs, then silence. I held my breath. Yo, UTOOKMYHIVE. Less of a voice, and more of a collision of wings and carapaces, a shaped buzzing. The red bee on my hand looked straight into my eyes. Not a single twitch. Nothing. I whispered under my breath, trying not to move my mouth. I didn't. There was a pause, a sudden shift as someone stepped back. A little moving mass came loose, dropping on top of my blanket. A handful of red bees, carefully spreading out to investigate me. Behind me, footsteps leading into Marla's bedroom. I could hear her deep breaths from here. I stayed completely still. I was unharmed. I'd be fine. I just had to wait. Every nerve in my body felt like it was put through a white fire. Still, and desperate to explode into action, as little creatures made their way across me, carefully looking me over. The pores on my skin were screaming at me to move, itch, and shudder. I could feel the hairs on my neck rise, only to be tugged on by eager mandibles. Then, a scream. Marla screamed. A bloody, mind-piercing screech. The kind of scream that you just know means pain. Hearing it was like feeling a physical push, and I couldn't hold myself from acting any longer. I rolled off the couch, trying to shake the bees off. The cluster on the window exploded into a disorganized attack, swarming every piece of me, and the room, and the adjoining kitchen. They were inside my clothes, in my hair, in my eyebrows, and they were going to eat their fair share. Every bite was white-hot fire, followed by a sudden stinging cold. I ran outside. I remember taking off my clothes, waving my shirt around, shoeless and burned by bites. I ran from her house, making as much space between me and the hive as possible. There was this blur of buzzing, biting, flailing, and screaming. Some of it mine, some of it Marla's. In the distance, little red spots crawling across my waving shirt. I threw myself on the ground, rolling in the grass. I smacked my body with the palm of my hand over and over, ensuring me that the little tickle I felt wasn't another one of them. Then I just lay there, panting in the grass. They were gone. A single red bee on the palm of my hand remained, carefully brushing itself before casually flying off. I could feel the soothing morning dew on my cheek. I slowly sat back up, leaning against a tree. I could see Marla's house in the distance as I gasped for air. There was a heaviness to my lungs, like I couldn't completely fill them. A man stepped out, or at least the shape of a man. It was hard to tell at that distance. It was as if he wasn't completely solid. His silhouette kept shifting even as he stood still. He stopped in the doorway, looked me way, and just sort of dissolved. I burst into action. My phone was still inside, but I had a backup in my car. I wrestled it out of the glove compartment, staining the driver's seat with spots of blood. My fingertips were bleeding, making it hard to call emergency services. My cheek and tongue were swollen, making it even harder to speak. I made my way back inside as I frantically explained what had happened. What would you even call it? An assault? Marla wasn't in her bedroom, but there was plenty of blood. There was a sound further in. Her shower was running. She'd made it to her bathroom and dropped into her tub. She'd turned on the water, hoping to keep them off. The end result was her ending up swollen and unconscious in the bathtub. Dead bees bobbing in the water around her, some still twitching. It was horrifying. She was bitten. And it wasn't just from bees. There were miscolored marks from all kinds of stings, coloring her skin both a burning red, a pale white, and a faint green. Her neck was almost as thick as her head, but she was alive. Emergency services arrived. They managed to keep her alive, but she had to be put on a ventilator. They claimed she'd had a massive allergic reaction. They said something similar about me, completely ignoring the eyewitness account of a strange intruder. It didn't help that neither me or Marla could say the slightest comprehensive thing about their appearance or identity. It took some time, but I recovered. Marla too. By the time she got back home, not a single hive was left. Every single one had been butchered and devoured. And the red bees, well, they were just gone, along with their handmade hive. Not too long ago, I talked to a friend of a friend who worked at the sheriff's office. I told them where we'd found that first hive. He asked me at least 3 times if I was sure that that was the specific spot. Of course I was. I even had a clip of it. Turns out, that place had been the discovery site of at least half a dozen unidentified bodies a couple of years ago, which, in turn, made me wonder. A couple of wanderers in the area had spoken about finding dead animals on the trail, only for them to be gone the next morning. It wouldn't surprise me if that field was littered with bones. But with the way these things work, there is no telling what else might have gone missing along that trail. That conversation is what spurred me to write this all down. Marla and I will never publish that video. And for all intents and purposes, neither of us will bring it up. This never happened. This couldn't be real. We can't move on with our lives if we keep talking about it, because there is nothing we can say that will make it all right. Instead, she has new hives. She has a new smile. And for a while, I think we can lie to ourselves just enough to make it. Story 6. I never left the house. My name is Lucia, and I have no idea of what my life even means. I think I'm somewhere around 18 years old. From what I saw on the internet, it seems to match me, but no one ever told me my age or my birthday. Apparently, most people celebrate their birthday by gathering people together and eating. At least that's what I understood. I'm still figuring things out. I should probably start from the beginning. I'm losing myself here. As far as I remember, I always lived here, in the house, and I never left it. The grown-ups around us always told us that there was nothing to see outside of it, and that it was for our own safety that we were kept here. And honestly, until these last few weeks, I never questioned it. I have one room to sleep, one room to wash myself, one room to eat, one room with computers, and one room where I went when they had to check on us. I shared all these rooms with Peter. Peter is the only person I've known for my whole life. The grown-ups that take care of us. They come and go. I think I've never known one that stayed more than 6 months maybe, apart from Tyler and Debbie. But Peter, he's like me. I think he's around my age. Again, I'm not sure. We always got along. Peter is nice. He's my friend, and we know everything about each other. I really like him. All of our days were always the same. We woke up to the sound of an alarm and got dressed. After that, we went to the checking room and grown-ups were looking at all sort of things on us. They were inspecting our skin, the inside of our mouths, listening to our heartbeats, and many more things. It always ended with an injection. They never told us what was in these shots that we always got, just that it was necessary. After the check, it was time to eat. The food was good, but it's all I ever had, so I can't really tell if it's that great. When we finished eating, it was time for the longest part of the day. We got out in the yard and waited. The yard had a bench, a climbing wall, a space to play basketball and soccer, and that was pretty much it. There was just one more thing. The whole yard was surrounded by buildings, except for one side, where there was a high fence. On the other side of it was a road and other buildings, and all day long, people would be there, watching us. Some were talking, others writing or taking pictures. They never stayed longer than 15 minutes. And when someone left, someone else was taking his place. Our instructions were the same since we were little. Ignore them. You might think it's hard to do, but when you're used to it, it's actually not that hard. Peter and I spent hours trying to reach the top of the climbing wall. Playing soccer, he's better than me, and basketball, I'm better than him. Talking, it was boring sometimes, but we found ways to make it entertaining. After something like 6 hours in the yard, we were allowed back inside, in the room with computers and books and CDs. It was our favorite moment of the day. We listened to music, played games on the computers. We had internet, but they said it was all fake, only made for entertainment in the past. Basically, they explained that what was on the internet was all from a long time ago, and that nothing we saw there still existed. It didn't really matter anyway. We were happy to play games and watch videos. However, we were strictly forbidden to interact in any way. We especially liked videos with animals. It was fun. After a few hours in that room, we had learning time where we watched videos that were teaching us different things, like talking properly, counting to 100, things like that. Then it was time to eat again. Then another check, another injection, after which we had to wash ourselves before going to sleep. So, as you can see, our lives weren't exactly thrilling. I can count with my fingers every time something was just a little different. I remember a few years ago, instead of grown-ups, there was a group of kids on the other side of the fence. They stayed for a few hours, and we were told that we were allowed to talk with them. Peter and I were pretty excited, so we went closer from the fence than usual and waited. We didn't exactly know how to engage in a conversation, so we just kind of sat there, waiting. Most of the kids were laughing. I think they were mocking us from what I understood, but a few of them actually talked with us. They asked us various things, like our favorite song, what we liked to eat, our daily lives. We asked them the same kind of questions, to which they answered for the most parts. They apparently couldn't talk about their lives. It's one of my favorite memories ever. Since these last 2 years, we also have Tyler and Debbie. They're the only grown-ups that we know the name of. They bring us our food, take us from one room to another, ask us if we need anything, and once a week, they come in the yard with us for a few hours. They play soccer and basketball with us. It's a lot of fun. They're the first grown-ups that we've really known ever, and with who we have actual conversations. A few years ago, I think 3, there was also an incident. It had been a while that I was looking at Peter a bit differently, and he kinda was too. When we were showering, we were looking at each other's bodies a lot, and we didn't really know why. I personally simply couldn't help it. It felt weird. Once, we talked about it in the yard. We both felt like we wanted to touch the other one for some reason, and to be very close from each other, especially in the shower. He didn't understand why either. That same day, when we went in the shower, we started to get closer from each other, and eventually we were touching each other. It felt weirdly nice. We were stopped pretty fast by grown-ups and put in separate rooms. We waited for maybe an hour before they brought us together in our room. A woman sat in front of us and started to talk to us. She explained that what we were feeling wasn't wrong, and that it was normal, but that they couldn't let us do these kinds of things with each other. Since then, we didn't shower at the same time, but another thing was also added to our daily routines. Before going in the shower, we were both took in a separate room where we were given pictures. He had naked women, and I had naked men. We were given an hour. At first I didn't really know what to do, but with time, I started to have my habits that I won't explain here. Another time when things weren't like usual was the time when nobody came on the other side of the fence. Of course, it wasn't the first time it happened, but the other time was because it was raining a lot, or snowing. But that one time, there was nothing that explained it, and also, we weren't told that there wouldn't be anyone. The grown-ups acted like it was a normal day. So, that's always been my life, until these last few days. Things started to get different 6 days ago. It was a morning like any other. We got dressed and went in the checking room. They checked everything they always checked. But when came the moment to get our injection, we got 2 shots. It was the first time they ever gave us more than 1. We asked why it changed, but they only answered that it was like that now. After that, we went to the room where we ate. Tyler and Debbie looked way more anxious and stressed than usual, and they looked tired too. We noticed it immediately but didn't ask anything. The rest of the day went as usual, but there were way less people on the other side of the fence. The next day went exactly the same way, and the one after that too. 3 days ago, there was even less people on the other side of the fence. We also started to hear screams. They sounded like screams of pain, or screams of rage sometimes. We had no idea who was screaming like that, but it was seriously scaring us. 2 days ago, there was almost no one left on the other side of the fence. I think we got something like 10 people for the entire day. The screams continued and got more intense and louder. Yesterday, things went the same way they did the day before. We got 2 shots. We ate. Tyler and Debbie looked exhausted like never before, and we went in the yard. That was the day when Tyler and Debbie came with us. The screams were louder than ever. As we were sitting in the yard, we dared to ask them what they were, but they answered that they didn't know what we were talking about. We didn't insist, but they were clearly lying, as they reacted to each scream like us. They didn't have the strength to play anything, so we just waited. Nobody came to see us, all day. Tyler and Debbie spent most of the time talking together, until just before the end. It was almost time to get back in when they asked us to come closer to them. They told us that we couldn't tell anyone about anything they were going to tell us. They told us that we couldn't trust anyone in here except them, and that things were slowly starting to go sideways, putting us in danger. They said that they couldn't explain too much, as no one could know that we knew anything. They told us that something very bad might happen that night, and that we had to protect ourselves. They discreetly handed us 2 pills. They explained that if we were too scared that night, we had to eat these immediately, and that it would save us. On that, the door to get inside opened and we had to go back. Tyler and Debbie left, and we were told that today we wouldn't get time in the computer room, or alone time. They gave us our injections, and we had to go to sleep just after. It was very rushed, and after what Tyler and Debbie told us, we were very anxious when the lights turned off. We really wanted to sleep close from each other, but it was forbidden since what happened 3 years ago. We talked a bit, but none of us really knew what to do of the things we were told earlier. We couldn't find some sleep, so we just stayed awake for a few hours. Eventually, we started to hear screams. It was close. They were screams of pain, and they were getting closer and closer from our room. None of us said anything. We were petrified. The door was locked, and we had no idea of what was going on. The screams were now clearly coming from the hall just outside of our room. They were people running, others screaming for help, and we could also hear screams of anger. Whatever was happening behind the door, we were praying that it would stay there. After some time, the screams slowly stopped before it went silent. It was suddenly completely silent. I stayed like that for almost 2 minutes, during which Peter and I were trying to make the less noise as possible. Without any warning, something started to hit our door. It was punching it, smashing it, screaming. The door was going to break at any moment. We couldn't hide our fear and started to scream for help. Both of us were crying. It was a matter of seconds before it broke, and Peter yelled at me to take my pill. I took it out of my pocket, looked at him, and we both swallowed it. My last memory is the screams getting louder, and then it's the blackout. I woke up in my room today. I was devastated to find that Peter had disappeared. The door was broken, and I had access to the hallway. I slowly got out of my bed and walked carefully towards it. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I reached the hall. The whole place was covered in blood, everywhere. I never saw that much of blood. It was on the wall, on the floor. I was a bit shocked, but I soon realized that there was absolutely no bodies. I thought it was weird. I yelled for help, hoping that Peter, Tyler, or Debbie would answer, but I had no answer. I walked towards the other rooms. There was still power, but all the rooms that I had access to were empty. There was absolutely nobody. There were other stains of blood all around the place, but not as much as in the hallway. I took the time to eat something fast. As the door to the kitchen was opened, I grabbed some bread and stuffed it in my mouth before exploring more. The only places that I had access to were the one that I was using in my daily life, and the kitchen and some offices in the hallway that were usually locked. I had access to the yard too. I wandered more when I saw something moving behind the climbing wall. I approached slowly and found a girl. She was probably 9 years old. She was wearing the same thing I was, and she looked terrified. She was dirty and way too skinny. I tried to reassure her and to know her name, but soon found out that she wasn't talking. I don't know if she can't talk or if she just doesn't want to, but she didn't say anything. My first instinct was to bring her some food. She ate a whole bread and some apples, I tried to communicate, to ask her who she was, what happened last night, but had no answers. At least, after I made her eat and brought her back inside, she didn't seem to be scared of me anymore. I tried to look everywhere for more people but didn't find anything. I eventually decided to tell my story here. I don't know if what they told us about the internet being something from the past is true, but I guess I'll find out by posting here if someone answers. I have no idea what to do now. So, if someone reads this, I'm open to any form of advice. Thank you. Story 7. There is a leak in my apartment ceiling, and I think it's hiding a portal to hell. I hear the dripping again. The constant drip, drip, drip of water. I blink my eyes open and try to focus to make sure I'm not in another nightmare. It sounds like another leak. This one might be the last time I will hear it before the horrible conclusion to this ordeal. The last time hearing that telltale noise, before the true nature of that loathsome portal is revealed, and whatever hideous dimension hiding on the other side breaks through completely. The sound is growing louder. Each drop has an exaggerated tone. It sounds like small explosions, all trying to collapse the ceiling and engulf me in the dark abyss that I have already once been forced to endure. I just can't believe this could really be happening. It just can't. It swallowed people up. The portal behind that damn leak. I don't know what to do. Just a short while ago, my only problem would have been the water damage to my belongings. Indeed, such a mundane problem as a leak in the ceiling would just be a minor issue. Nothing to fear except the repair bill, yet I'm afraid it is a bit beyond that now. I shouldn't have waited this long, I should have just left. Yet where could I have gone? Maybe I should have paid more attention to who I was talking to and what they were saying. All too late now, I suppose. I have been living in this apartment for close to 6 months. I had moved into this dingy complex, to a small studio apartment after I lost my job and had to find a part-time position at significantly less pay. I tried to stay optimistic, but even before the terrible reality of what I was stepping into was clear, I was still on hard times. I could barely afford this decrepit room as it was, and I had no family or friends to speak of that I might be able to move in with, so my options were essentially non-existent. Considering the dire situation, I found the cheapest accommodation I could, and what I found was my home and hell for the last 6 months. Number 316 at the Greenfield Heights apartment complex. The amenities included paper-thin walls to hear all the drug deals gone wrong, domestic violence and constant sirens of emergency vehicles blaring from all sorts of incidents, topped off with a nice turn-down service of package and mail theft to boot. All of these problems, though, feel small compared to the true horror of what the place had in store for me. No, it wasn't exactly a paradise, but I had to find the cheapest place I could. I was barely making a fraction of what I was before at my old job, and I needed somewhere to get back on my feet. I told myself it was temporary, and once I could get a better job, I would get out of here. When I had first arrived to look at the place, I had arranged a simple walkthrough with the landlord, Mr. Jacobs, a very unpleasant fellow who always looked perpetually angry and was constantly shouting in the halls and at the few miserable-looking staff who worked here. We walked up 2 flights of stairs, passing a wall of profanity-laden graffiti, tagged along almost the whole length of it, leading up to where my future home was to be. Mr. Jacobs opened the door, and the rattling handle nearly fell off in the effort. We stepped inside, and the dank room stank like a tomb. The tiny apartment was depressing, and when he went to turn on the main light, nothing happened. He scoffed and muttered a string of colorful language and grumbled that someone will bring a new light bulb. I told Rodney to check earlier, that lazy piece of shit. I didn't want to press the matter since he looked pissed off. So we went in, and he showed me what little there was to see of the tiny apartment. We had to rely on the dim light of the bedroom to see elsewhere, since the main light was out. Despite leading the walkthrough, it looked like Mr. Jacobs was distracted. He was looking at the ceiling in the corner of the tiny living room, with a concerning grimace on his face. He stared at it for a while and paused the tour. I found it a little weird. He finally looked back at me, as if noticing that I was watching him stare at the ceiling, and he shrugged and asserted that, "You're going to want to get some buckets." When it rains heavily, that part of the ceiling leaks. Can't seem to find out how, since there's no leak on 416 above, but bad luck on this one. I guess that's the only reason the price is so low. He shot me a grin that I could only describe as enthusiastically malicious. After the brief walkthrough, Mr. Jacobs turned around and asked very bluntly, "You are not a troublemaker, are you?" His eyes narrowed and he looked very threatening suddenly. I assured him of my earnest intent and need for a place to stay, and he softened briefly. At least I think he did. It was hard to tell with him. He regarded me one more time and said, "Good, we don't need more troublemakers. Too many questions. Always snooping around. If you have any questions, try to figure it out yourself. This isn't the Ritz, we don't take care of everything for you. You are going to have to make do as is. Something really bad like a fire, then you can call. But for minor shit, best to just figure it out yourself. Rent's due on the 1st, by the way. No exceptions and no grace period. Anyone who bums out on their debt gets their asses kicked out next day. Fuck tenant laws." He shot me another wicked smile and returned downstairs, leaving me with the keys and just assuming I had agreed to move in. I was dumbfounded by the combination of his upfront hateful attitude and the subtext of certain things he had mentioned. What in his mind was a troublemaker? And what happened to those who asked too many questions? I couldn't believe I was going to have to live here. In a better position I would have left immediately, but it was either here or homeless. All the other places I had looked were too expensive. So I left and began packing my things. The whole situation was awful, but I had no choice. I moved in the next weekend. Moving day was as bleak as my mood. It had been raining on and off again all day and seemed to start heavily just in time to when I was moving my boxes. Almost as if to spite me, I started taking my stuff upstairs to my new room. As I was taking the first box up the stairs, I thought I heard a gunshot. I rushed on in nervous tension, and as I was approaching my door, I heard a voice call out in a tone that was actually friendly. "Excuse me, it looks like you dropped something." I was surprised to see a woman standing in the hall with a look of friendly concern. As I looked down to see I had indeed dropped something from the broken box I was trying to carry upstairs. "Hi, I'm Maxine. I am your neighbor in 315. I introduced myself and was relieved to have found a friendly face for a change. "Hey there, I'm Greg. Nice to meet you." I held out my hand and she looked uncomfortable briefly and declined the handshake. "Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, I shouldn't, but it is nice to meet you," she said with another disarming smile. I was relieved to see someone who didn't look they were minutes away from killing me or someone else. Though the paranoid part of my brain was begging the question why such a seemingly nice person was stuck here. I considered asking her, but figured it would be rude to pry about her situation. She might have been like me and just on hard times. I was embarrassed when I realized I was just standing there after saying hello and stumbled for words, but she spoke first. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Greg. Stay safe and try not to let your spirits get down. It's easy in this place, but nothing bad lasts forever." She smiled and waved goodbye. I looked down to make sure the box was secure, and when I looked up to say goodbye, she was already gone. I wondered how she was so fast. Nevertheless, I felt slightly more hopeful that things might be okay after all. Another hour of moving boxes and my knees were on fire, but the meager possessions I had were finally stuffed haphazardly into the tiny apartment. I was dead tired, but it was only 4 p.m. I figured I had earned a nap though, and went into the tiny closet that was supposedly a bedroom. No furniture fit besides my old mattress that took up the entirety of the space. I laid down and started drifting off. The peaceful sound of rain started to get heavier, and then I heard a new sound which woke me from my doze. A tiny dripping sound coming from the main room. I remembered what Mr. Jacobs had said about heavy rain and a leak, and I got up quickly to make sure the water was not landing on all my boxes and getting everything wet. I looked up in the corner of the room, and sure enough, there was a steady dripping onto one of the boxes below. I poked around and found the dishes box and took out a few pieces of Tupperware and a bowl and set one underneath the leak. I thought for a moment about calling Mr. Jacobs, but then remembered how he had given up on fixing this leak and realized it would do no good. I turned around to go back to bed when I heard an odd tearing sound like wallpaper being stretched to breaking point. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I figured it was just my nerves and I went back to bed. I slept for about 2 hours, and despite the brief rest, I had a vivid nightmare of drowning in a dark lake with no shores on any side. It was horrible, just sinking into a black watery abyss. I was embarrassed as I woke up with a scream, but relaxed as I realized it was just a dream and no one likely heard or cared that someone in 316 was screaming anyway. I figured the rain and that damn leak had got me thinking about water, and my negative mood may have contributed to a nightmare. So I brushed it off and went about trying to organize the chaos of boxes in some logical manner for this small space. Later that night I had a cup of ramen for dinner and turned in early. I read a bit before bed, almost as if trying to postpone sleep for fear of sinking into that fathomless abyss again when I slept. Eventually, I started to get comfortable and thought I may fall asleep when it started again. Drip, drip, drip. The leak had resumed. It sounded faster than before, and I thought it was strange that I could hear it so vividly. I got up to see if maybe it had overflowed or something, and I was not prepared for what I saw. The ceiling where the leak was had an odd lambent light near the center, kind of like a black light. It seemed to be pulsing in time with the drops of water. There was an odd type of density in the air too, like it was too heavy and thick. It was maddeningly humid as well, despite the cold atmosphere of the room and outside. I was confused and kind of scared by the bizarre display. I just kept thinking to myself, it is only temporary. As soon as I can leave, I will. I can make it through anything short term. I took a step further into the living room and noticed a wet spot on the floor. There is no way it could be all the way over here. The bowl on the floor was not even full yet. I suspected a leak might also be over in this spot now. So I looked up and screamed out loud. There was what looked like a face pressing through the ceiling with drops of water seeping from the thing's mouth. I turned to run and tripped on the wet floor and toppled over, bashing my head into a wall and almost losing consciousness. I was trying to stagger to my feet after getting knocked senseless, and the memory of the face reminded me of my peril. I got to my feet and looked up in tense expectation. There was nothing there. No leak, no face, no glowing shifting portal. The only evidence of anything was a small wet spot on the ceiling about 9 inches across. At that point I thought for sure that depression over my situation was causing me to go crazy and see things. I desperately wished I could be somewhere else just then. But it was late at night, and I needed sleep. I couldn't afford a hotel, obviously, so I left my room and went outside to the parking lot to sleep in my car. Another week went by with poor work hours, barely any food and bad sleep. Though the one bright side was the surprisingly good weather, days went by and no odd events took place in my apartment. It was a struggle, but at least with a little sunshine, there was no leak to conjure up such terrible nightmares like what I had experienced before. I ran into Maxine again on the way to the laundry room and couldn't help but ask if she knew of anything having happened in my room before I moved in, like anyone having seen anything weird or the like. She shifted uncomfortably and looked down, pausing as if not wanting to answer. I'm sorry, I don't know much. I had not been here for very long when the last person in 316 had left. I say left, but I heard there was an accident of some sort. There was a lot of commotion, and I had heard some strange rantings from the man before it happened. She took a breath to steady herself after the stress of recounting the story and looked away. I was away at work when it actually happened. Apparently, he had been found dead in the apartment. Some say he killed himself, drowning. From what I heard, he was a bad man. There are a lot of bad men that live here. The things that have happened that never got reported, and the people that got hurt, or worse, well, she looked away sorrowfully for a moment and resumed. Well, you wouldn't want to know. A coward like that would try and kill himself. But I think something akin to justice may have caught up to him, something that this place might need more of. When you live with the stain of hate and violence, it leaves something behind, and perhaps sometimes the world finds a way to wash it away and right the wrongs. Anyway, I don't like to think about it. I have to run, I have to get ready for work. Sorry, I couldn't help more. I hope you stay safe and stay dry. You wouldn't want to get swept up too. She turned a corner and I saw a fallen cardigan. I bent down to pick it up and it felt wet, like it had been washed already. Not too weird if she just did laundry, but her footprints were soaking wet as well. I grabbed the garment and rushed round the corner, shouting out, "Hey, Maxine, you dropped this." But she was gone. The wet footprints randomly stopped as well. How did she stop leaving them if her feet were wet? A few more months passed with no leaks and only a few nightmares. My luck turned sour again for different reasons, though. I suffered a severe back injury at work. Since it occurred while working, I got some workers' comp so I wouldn't lose all my income. I did have to take time off of work, so I was forced to stay in my apartment all day and night recouping. To make matters worse, it was getting into the season for spring showers, and the forecast was heavy rain for the next week. I was not quite bedridden, but walking and bending over was very uncomfortable. I considered taking a drive somewhere, anywhere but here. But I couldn't manage the stairs again today, and I knew I at least needed to actually rest for 1 or 2 of my days off. So I was stuck in the apartment, watching the clouds gather and the skies darken. I placed several dishes under the leak spot in anticipation, and I swigged some energy drinks and coffee. I would rest, but I disliked the idea of sleeping any more than I had to, since I still feared those disturbing dreams in the water. I tried to distract myself by watching some old DVDs, since I had no streaming services to watch. As I started to relax around late afternoon, I was shocked back into a frenzied paranoia when the storm kicked up in intensity and knocked the power out. I tried not to panic and knew I had some candles or a flashlight or two somewhere. I would have to get up though, so I figured I would stay in the bedroom. I used my phone flashlight to find a candle and matches and hurried back to the bedroom just as the leak restarted and the drip was heard filling the bowls left out. I felt silly fleeing the leak like it was dangerous. I didn't know why that dream had affected me so much, but it felt wrong. I sat in the dark and waited for the power to return, but it did not. I fought sleep, but even in my paranoid state I started to drift off. I was content that the door was closed at least, and it slightly muffled the sound of that constant dripping. I awoke to the sounds of running water. The drip was replaced by a torrent that almost sounded like a waterfall. I was too afraid to move, but I had to see if my room was being flooded. I got up painfully and stepped down into ankle-high water. Oh God, this is bad. I thought immediately as I moved to the door to see what had happened. I heard a singular splashing noise, almost like someone stepping through the water. My heart froze as I stopped just short of opening the door and focused on the sound. I heard the splashing again. It was definitely footsteps. I didn't know what to do. I tried to think who might break in. A robber? Maybe it was about the flooding. Maybe it was Mr. Jacobs after all. I grabbed the candlestick and lit the candle. If I needed to, I might be able to use it as an improvised weapon. If it could be a murder weapon in Clue, then why not? I cautiously opened the door, and there was a backwash of even more water on the other side. It almost knocked me off my feet. I stumbled through the door, struggling in the cold water. I knew it was impossible, but it felt like there was a current running through it, like I was standing in the mouth of a river. I finally stepped past the door and into the living room, and almost dropped the candle into the oddly surging waters. The sight before me was both amazing and terrifying. The water was moving. It was flowing into a whirlpool that was at the center of the room, but as it neared the center, it inverted and seemed to be spiraling out from the ceiling rather than the pooled water on the floor, in a sight that blatantly disregarded all laws of gravity. The spectacle was so amazing I almost forgot the footsteps I had heard, and until they resumed, my gawking was broken, and I saw large bursts of water splashing toward me. I heard an ear-splitting cry like the wail of a banshee, and suddenly the ceiling where the leak was coming from and the current epicenter of the vortex started to glow, and after a moment it turned deep red, and a new horror occurred. The face I had seen in what I had hoped was a nightmare before was back. The ceiling seemed to shimmer now, almost translucent, and I saw the horrible features of a hideous form. White, pupilless eyes stared down at me, and a gaping, screaming maw began filling with water tinged with red. No, it wasn't water. It was blood. The vortex began spewing blood all across the room, and as I turned to flee in horror, I was wrenched from my feet by the invisible force in the water and dragged kicking and screaming into the heart of the vortex. My last conscious sight that night was being pulled up into my own ceiling and into the bleeding maw of that avatar of bloody nightmare. I woke up in the black abyss. The water was still mixed with blood, but there were no creatures. I was somehow buoyant and floated along in the shore-less sanguine ocean. I drifted along, unable to sink or to fully rise up. After what felt like an hour of drifting, I heard splashing, and all of a sudden the sound got louder and louder. I looked around and saw the source of the noise. Bodies were falling from the sky into the bloody ocean. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. A literal storm of blood-soaked, featureless bodies came crashing into the water. I tried to evade them, but I could not dodge them all, and I was buffeted by the limp forms of countless bodies until I was pummeled below the surface of the water. I couldn't breathe, and as I tried to surface, one of the bodies grasped my wrist and opened its eyes. On its previously featureless face, it now had oddly pulsating white pupils, and it burst what appeared to be stitching on its mouth in order to scream under the water. The sight and shock of that horrible scene woke me, and I realized I was laying on my back in my apartment again. The floodwater was lapping at my face, and I was breathing in and choking on the water on the floor. I lurched up as soon as I regained control of my body, spitting water and gagging from the quasi-drowning I had endured. The water looked normal, no blood from what I saw, but the water itself was not a delusion or some trace of insanity. It was there. It was a bad scene. Tons of my things were submerged, and the water damage was extensive. Somehow it had risen to almost 2 feet high. I had to do something. I didn't expect much from this place, but this was a severe enough situation that the crotchety old bastard Mr. Jacobs was going to have to fix something, whether he liked it or not, or they would be getting a lawsuit in short order. I figured some lawyers would take easy cases they knew they would win with no retainer needed if they got paid more at the end. So, it would not be a bluff. I was dead serious. I almost drowned in my own apartment. I staggered to the door and managed to open it, draining tons of water out into the hall, but I didn't care. I just needed some fresh air. My back was on fire, but nothing would stop me. I heard a voice calling out to me. It was Maxine. "Hey, are you okay? I saw all the water and hadn't seen you around. Is there flooding there?" She asked with an odd look, almost like she knew the answer but didn't want to let on. "Yes, there is. It is pretty bad, actually. I was just about to call Mr. Jacobs to do something about it." "Greg." She paused for a moment, then continued. "You didn't see anything in there, did you? In the water? Like something or someone familiar?" I was confused by the specific nature of the question. I was put off and unsure how she knew I might have seen something. "I am not sure what I saw." "Why do you ask?" I responded. "No reason. Just be careful. It can be dangerous if you do. Don't worry if it is not where you belong. You won't get pulled in forever. Just be careful, though. You don't want to risk it." A flash of morbid glee was evident on her face for a split second, and then it was gone. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. "Pulled in? How do you know about the leak? And if you do, what's behind it?" I asked with mounting suspicion evident in my voice. "You know, Greg, in many cultures, the path between the world of the living and the dead is separated by only the slightest barrier, often a literal or symbolic body of water, whether the river Styx, the lake of fire, the waters reflected at the feet of a Tory gate. It is often just potent waters, like all bodies of water. When they are contained somewhere, there can be leaks. Sometimes the water is not the only thing that seeps out." She stopped speaking for a moment and fixed me with an intent stare that made me feel very strange. I did not know what she was talking about. Was she saying that portal leads to some sort of afterlife? Like heaven, or more likely in this case, hell? "Did you just say..." And she cut me off, saying, Oh, if Mr. Jacobs finally goes over there to fix your ceiling, let him know I had a concern I needed to express to him as well. It's been waiting for a long time. She smiled again in a creepy way that disturbed me. Ah, yeah, sure, I guess I can do that. Thanks. See you later and hope you feel better. Those accidents can be rough. Best not sleep on your side and to drink lots of water. The right kind, though. She winked at me and departed. And I was at a loss for what just happened. How did she know I had gotten hurt? I didn't tell her. And what was that thing about the right kind of water? My anxiety about the situation was increasing, and I was disturbed by Maxine's questions too. Maybe she was not so sweet and trustworthy after all. After far too long being ignored and dealing with the first sodden, now mouldering cloths, boxes and other personal effects, Mr. Jacobs finally scheduled a time to drain the last remnants of water and do something more concrete about fixing the leak. I was waiting patiently for his arrival, and there was a loud banging at the door. I greeted Mr. Jacobs and he grunted at me, and without looking at me walked past and looked up at the hole in the ceiling. He had an odd air of what almost looked like fear or concern on his face. After he walked in, another larger person in coveralls and holding a toolbox did as well. There was a large tarp or something that seemed odd to bring to this sort of job. It almost looked like a big sort of bag. They were both looking at the hole in the ceiling, and Mr. Jacobs turned on a dime and stared me down. It's just been water leaking down. Nothing else, right? I thought the question was odd, and I hesitated to answer since I was thinking of those vivid nightmares. I think he may have noticed that because his face sank, and he glowered at me, looking significantly angrier and more dangerous than before. Before I could answer, he shouted at me. What did you see? Did something come out of the hole? Was it a person? He looked manic and deranged, and I looked at the other man in the coveralls, and he stood silent, holding a sledgehammer that had appeared in his hand and watching the confrontation unfold. I don't know, I just saw the leak. What is going on? What do you think I saw? My neighbor asked me the same thing earlier. Mr. Jacob's eyes narrowed. What neighbor? I haven't had tenants in 315 or 317 in over a year. I was confused. Maybe I had heard Maxine's apartment number wrong, but how could she be my neighbor if she was not in one of those? This must be some kind of mix-up, I figured. My neighbor Maxine, she said she lives in 315. I just saw her the other day and she asked if I had seen something as well. At the mention of the name, Mr. Jacob's face turned white. You said her name was Maxine? She said that? You saw her? He was screaming at me, asking more questions about Maxine like she was on America's Most Wanted. What does she have to do with this? I don't know what the hell is going on, I admitted. Ignoring my question, Mr. Jacobs began pacing and holding his hand to his head. The man in coveralls spoke for the first time. Jack, we have to go. Let's find the body while the leak and portal are still here and dispose of the loose end. I gasped at the admission of both a body and that I was apparently a loose end to some sort of crime. I fucking know. All right, make it quick. We are going to have to do two, so let's go before more people start coming home and we risk someone hearing. I fell back against the wall in shock as the large man hefted the sledgehammer and started stomping toward me. I was unarmed and injured. I didn't know what I could do, but suddenly the lights went out again. The door slammed shut, and as the three of us stood there in stunned silence, a slow drip began to trickle from the ceiling. Each drop splashing off of the low-standing pool of water. The large man went to the door and tried to open it, but to no avail. Jack, what is going on? The man shouted to Mr. Jacobs. I don't know, just use the hammer. Kill him and then bust us out of here. Or just give it to me and I will fucking do it. They were going to kill me? I had to think of something quick, so I stammered out. Wait, I don't know what is going on, you guys. You don't want to kill me, I really don't know anything. Let's just get out of here before the water gets much worse. I think something bad is going to happen. As if on cue, the dripping stopped, and a torrent of water was disgorged from the hole in the ceiling, which now held a horribly familiar glow and was pouring a blood-red liquid into the apartment. There was a giggle followed by a blood-curdling screech, and the man in the coveralls with the hammer, was wrenched up off his feet and dragged kicking and screaming into the water. Mr. Jacobs and I both watched as his entire head was forced under the water by some unseen force. The man was being drowned, and as he looked like he might kick up, a splash of water landed next to him, revealing a brief outline of a female form. The eyes were white, and it had a horrible smile on its face. Its unnaturally long hand was wrapped fully around the man's throat and was effortlessly throttling him. Mr. Jacobs saw something or someone he recognized in the violent mist and started sobbing and begging for mercy. "I didn't mean to. Please, it was an accident. I would have been locked up. I couldn't lose everything. I had to." I sat in stark terror as the falling water from the ceiling became a storm. The millions of droplets highlighted the attacker. Her form was terrible yet oddly mesmerizing. She strolled along towards Mr. Jacobs, who was grasping at the door handle and tugging uselessly at it. He reached for the hammer when he was pulled toward the figure by a moving tendril of bloody water. "Just a little bath, Jack, that's all, it won't hurt." "Much." He tried to scream, but his head was submerged in the bloody water. I saw the sentient waves of ruinous liquid grasp each of his appendages and tear him limb from limb in a bloody explosion. I screamed and stumbled away, wading through the water into my bedroom, and desperately pulled on the window to escape that way. I heard splashing footsteps and a soft, pretty tune being sung by an ethereal voice. Then I heard a giant crash and saw a portion of wall collapse along with more of the ceiling, and the sight before my eyes almost drove me insane. There was a vortex of bloody water sucking the maimed bodies of those men into the hellish portal where the leak originated, and at the center was the bloody figure smiling at me and waving a hand as I finally got the window to budge and fall out. I stepped outside and tried to descend the fire escape, but the surface was too slippery, and I fell. I screamed and plummeted down and thought I would land on my head and die. Yet as I fell, my descent slowed, and to my shock and horror, I realized the rainwater was mixing with the water from my apartment flowing out of the window, and I was being pulled back up into my room. I tried to scream, but I felt water fill my mouth. At some point in the nightmare ride, I blacked out again. That was the last thing I remembered before I found myself here again. As I listened to the leak once more, I wonder if it could have all been a bad dream. The water, the leak, the portal, it is all too much. It couldn't have been real. I will go into my dingy living room and see the water dripping into the bowl and realize it was all just a terrible dream. Yet when I sit up, I notice an odd breeze, and when my eyes focus in the dark, I see lights in the sky. The ceiling is gone. I don't know what is going on here, but I know I have to get out of here now. I hear splashing footsteps again over the ever-present dripping and see in the sky now the light of the monstrous portal opening in the very clouds above. It is too much. I leap from the fire escape again. Somehow in my mad haste I survive descending the fire escape, and I sit here now writing this impossible story in my car that I have been living in nearly a week after the fact. I heard on the news the reports of a structural collapse at my apartment and the landlord being unavailable for questioning, presumed missing along with another man who worked at the apartment as a special contractor. I thought about Mr. Jacobs and the man in the coveralls and shuddered when I remembered them being drawn into that unholy portal in the ceiling. Apparently, it had not been the only disappearance in the building either. Around a year ago, there was a missing persons report for a Maxine Valoroso. I remember how Mr. Jacobs reacted to her name, and it made me wonder what really happened here before I moved in. I don't know who or what Maxine was. Maybe she was the same person in the report, changed somehow. Best I can guess, Mr. Jacobs had known something about her disappearance. Maybe he had killed her, and somehow she came back for revenge. She mentioned the water washing away people's violent lives, and I shuddered when I considered her smile when talking about the last person in 316 and the overdue message she had to send to Mr. Jacobs. I didn't know if she was a ghost, a demon, or what. I also don't know the extent of her reach or if she is satisfied with just those men, and who knows how many others she had washed away from that room with that dread portal. I suppose it doesn't matter to me anymore. I am never going back there. I gave all my belongings up for lost, and the building was condemned anyway after the landlord disappeared and the ceiling collapsed in several sections of the building. I think there are terrible things they will discover if they ever really investigate the building. Perhaps they will find bodies. Perhaps the bodies are all gone, sucked into that watery abyss, that eldritch gate to hell whose opening started with a simple leak. If something like that can happen, I just don't know. I don't know if anyone is safe anymore. Story 8. Manhunt. Rock, paper, scissors to see who hides first, Sean said with as much assertiveness a 12-year-old can muster. Best 2 out of 3. I know how to play the stupid game, I said, not so subtly showing just how annoying I thought Sean was. He was 2 years older than me, and made a habit of reminding me of that fact whenever the opportunity arrived, especially in front of our mother. We had played rock, paper, scissors enough times for me to know Sean's opening move. I won the first round. He won the second. We tied a few times, until I finally won the last round. We'll hide first. Let's play big boundaries tonight. No way. There aren't enough people to play big boundaries. Let's just do normal boundaries, Sean rebuked, apprehensive about the idea of extending the boundaries. What are you, chicken? I mocked, placing my fists on my hips and flapping my arms back and forth. I told you to stop doing that. We're doing normal boundaries. I'm the oldest. What I say goes. He stomped his foot on the ground as his words crescendoed into a scream on the final word that left his lips. I rolled my eyes. Chicken, I mumbled under my breath. Whatever. You, Tommy and Cam all count to 60, and no looking either. We ran off before Sean could protest my mumbling. I looked back behind me to see they had all turned around facing Tommy's bright yellow house in the center of the street. The neighborhood we lived in was shaped like a T, with Tommy's house being in the center of the top portion of the T. The top of the T was known as Cushing Saint. On the left side was a well-lit main road, and on the right was a side street that ran parallel to the main road. The long portion of the T was Park Ave and was a dead-end street. However, at the end of it was a set of concrete steps that led down towards the parking lot of a convenience store. Cozy 2-story, coastal New England-style homes lined both streets, each with large backyards, none of which were explicitly off-limits to us. However, there was one yard that nobody ever went to. One of the houses on Park Ave was implicitly off-limits. It was by far the biggest house on the street, and it was split off into 2 sections. The first section was the main house, which was situated atop a small hill that looked over the rest of the neighborhood. And the second portion was an in-law suite that was situated on the same level as the street. The windows had newspaper plastered onto them from the inside, making it impossible to see into or out of the house. The whole house was a faded shade of baby blue, with a black shingled roof that had missing shingles scattered about. The sides of the house were speckled with caked-on dirt, and yellow water stains lined portions of the siding of the house. The yard was off to the side of the house and was filled with grass that nearly consumed my 10-year-old body, reaching all the way up to my chest at some points, and in the center of the yard was a large pine tree that stood at the very least 20 feet tall. 30. Halfway there, Sean shouted out into the neighborhood. I eyed the tree, sprinted over to it, and climbed it as fast as I could. I tried not to think about all the rumors that surrounded the house. After all, this was the last Saturday of the summer before school started up again. I couldn't hold anything back. I got about 12 feet up before I heard Sean scream out, 60! Ready or not, here we come! From then on, I stayed completely still and utterly silent. I was always good at hiding. I had to be. I wasn't the fastest kid, and I didn't have the same stamina the rest of the kids in the neighborhood did. Sean was always faster than me. Tommy and Cam were only a year older than I was, but they had infinitely more stamina than I did. But in order to try and catch me, they had to find me first. My team had Patrick and Luke. Patrick was good at hiding, but not as good as me, and Luke was the only kid who could beat Sean in a race. And that angered Sean to no end. The two of them were always racing each other from one end of Park Ave and back, and Sean never once came within 10 feet of victory. It was no competition for Luke, and I always made sure I had him on my team. From outside the tree, I was nearly invisible, but I could see everything. I spotted Luke's hiding spot almost immediately. He was laying down in the mulch behind a small shed situated in the backyard across from me. The backyard he was in was enclosed by a 6-foot-tall wooden fence along the street, and a smaller 4-foot-tall fence that bordered the neighboring backyard. A small section of chain-linked fence acted as a gate into the backyard. I watched Cam walk down Park Ave, towards the dead end. His head was on a swivel, scanning every nook and cranny that he could think to look in. Sean followed behind Cam, around 30 feet back, except he went into the backyard. I heard the chain-linked fence rattle as it opened and shut, and from Luke's reaction, so did he. "Hey, check that yard." "I've got this one," Sean ordered Cam. He nodded and did as he was told. My eyes darted over to Luke. I watched as he got up, jumped the 4-foot fence and sprinted past Cam. Cam gave chase and shouted out for Sean's help. Sean followed, jumping over the same fence Luke did. Over the next 10 minutes, I listened to Sean, Cam, and eventually Tommy coordinate their efforts to catch Luke. He was escorted by his captors to Tommy's front steps, where he was to stay until the rest of us were found, or until either Patrick or myself freed him from jail. Tommy, the slowest of the three, stood guard to make sure neither one of us could free Luke. From my perch, I scanned the surrounding area looking for Patrick, but he was nowhere to be found, probably in a backyard I couldn't see into. I began to look up into the sky, hoping to spend my newfound alone time counting the stars, but they weren't there, obscured by the clouds that so often hung over our small coastal town. With nowhere else to look, I began to look at the house. When I was younger, Sean teased me with stories about the house, how there was a witch who lived there. He'd say, "You better listen to me when Mom isn't around, or else the witch next door will come and grab you and eat you." Whenever Mom wasn't around, he would grab the milk carton from the fridge and show me the missing kid on the back, point towards the house, and tell me that those kids were stuck in that house. The witch was taking the kids for the sole purpose of eating them. I looked away from the house. Sean always lied, and besides, only babies believed in the witch, and I wasn't a baby, not anymore. I continued scanning the area. I looked back over to Tommy's front steps. Luke was still stuck in jail, and Tommy still stood guard. I heard footsteps slamming down against the asphalt. Tommy shot his eyes to his right, looking towards the sound of footsteps. He got low and spread his arms out, making himself as big as possible. Quickly, another set of footsteps bounded across the asphalt, much faster than the first set. 1, 2, 3 manhunt, Sean screamed out, letting out an exasperated sigh. He proudly escorted a defeated Patrick to join Luke on Tommy's front steps. Tommy, Cam and Sean gathered around and moved to the intersection of Cushing St. and Park Ave. Sean crafted their game plan, and he was far from quiet. "Cam, you start walking down Park Ave. Tommy, stay here at the intersection and keep a lookout, and make sure he doesn't free Luke and Patrick. I'll check each backyard on Cushing Street. We'll meet back here in 10 minutes if we haven't found him." With that, they all followed their assignments. I watched Cam pace up and down the street, and I couldn't help but silently chuckle to myself as he searched all my typical spots, underneath decks, in overturned trash cans, but at no point did he ever look up in my direction. I couldn't see Sean, except for when he passed by Tommy's house during his search, but besting him in this game always brought a smile to my face. Suddenly, that feeling of triumph and superiority came crashing down as I felt my stomach drop and my grip on the tree branch weaken. I'd been watching Tommy, Cam, and Sean, but the thought of somebody watching me hadn't crossed my mind, not until my peripheral vision caught something truly chilling. In one of the windows facing me, through a series of pine needles, I could see a corner of the newspaper had been ripped off, and in its place was now a smile, an unnatural, crooked smile. The lips were uneven. They stretched across the face at different intervals, creating a slant. The teeth were yellow, and they each folded over each other, as though there wasn't enough space for all of them inside of the mouth. The top two front teeth protruded out in front of the lips, not too dissimilar to a rabbit. The smile vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, and in its place was the quick flash of light illuminating the whole side yard. But it was centered around the tree, centered around me. No, that couldn't be right. There was no way. I was seeing things. I had to be seeing things. My mom always told me I had a wild imagination. There was no way for a light to have flashed. There was no way for me to see a disembodied smile. I closed my eyes tight and violently forced them open again. The newspaper was still ripped off of the corner. I looked away. Although the smile had vanished, I couldn't bring myself to look back at the house again. At least, not for a while. Sean always lied. There was no witch. Only babies believed in the witch, and I wasn't a baby. The flash had to be headlights somewhere around the neighborhood that just happened to hit the tree. Right? It was headlights, and that piece of newspaper was missing before. I just didn't notice it before then. That smile was just my imagination creating something out of pine needles in the tree. I had nothing to worry about. Cam. Sean, get over here! Tommy screamed out into the thick, humid air. His eyes locked dead onto the tree, and even though I knew he couldn't see me, his eyes were staring directly into my own. Cam and Sean arrived. Tommy pointed up at the tree. I think he's in there. I saw a flash of light come from the house, and I swear I saw an outline of a person in that tree. His finger trembled as it pointed up at me. That's crazy, Sean blurted out. He wouldn't go in that yard. He's too pussy. Then explained the flash, Sean. I don't know, Tommy. You're bored and you're seeing things. Don't bother us with anything stupid like that again. Come, keep looking down Park. I'll keep going on Cushing. He's not clever. He's probably somewhere obvious we just haven't checked yet. Tommy was disheartened. He looked to his prisoners for affirmation, but found none. He continued standing his watch. But now, he didn't take his eyes off the tree that I was in. I was stuck there. I knew I had no shot of outrunning any of them, and so whether I liked my spot or not, I was in it for the long haul. I was mad at Sean, and I wanted him to give up. Prove him wrong. Show him that I wasn't some dumb kid. In that moment, more stalwart than ever, I tightened my grip on the branches. They weren't going to ever find me. Tommy had his suspicions, but there was no chance he'd come into the yard to try and prove them right. Cam and Sean didn't believe him. I could stay here indefinitely. I took a small bit of pride in that fact. My spot had worked out. The feeling of triumph brought a smile to my face. I had to restrain myself from laughing with how perfectly everything had worked out. My pride was overwhelming, and as I felt it rising, I learned a very hard lesson. What goes up must come down. I heard the distinct creak of hinges ridden with dirt, dust and grime, echo out into the darkness of the night. It came from the house. Any and all ambient light was now blocked out by my eyelids as fear washed over my body. The witch isn't real. Sean always lies. I'm not a pussy. These 3 sentences ran on a loop for what seemed like decades, but of course it was much closer to 30 seconds. I managed to open my eyes just enough to resemble something closer to a squint. I looked over at Tommy. His eyes were wide, and his gaze had left the tree and was now planted firmly on the house. I traced the path his eyes carved across the neighborhood to find what had caught his attention. The front door, which led directly into the side yard, was now slightly ajar. The ambient streetlight was sucked into the pitch-black darkness of the house's interior, leaving a small sliver of the filth-ridden floor just barely visible. I kept my eyes on the door, praying that it didn't open any further. The world stood still, and it was as though there were only a few things left. The door, myself, and the 30 feet of space between us. Everything else around me had faded far into the background. In this pocket of the world, there was nothing. There was no sound, no crickets singing songs of the night, No rabbits making their journey through impossibly tall grass. And thankfully, nobody other than me, at least nobody that I could see. A light summer breeze thrust itself upon the house, causing the door to once again creak and open up ever so slightly more. Slam! Startled, I shuddered and nearly lost grip of the branches that kept me safe from the fall. I watched something dart across the beam of light. The beam had illuminated a dilapidated, sickly pale figure that was visible for less than a fraction of a second before the door quickly slammed. After the slam, I heard the sound of several locks clicking into place. The witch isn't real. Sean always lies. I'm not a pussy. I have an overactive imagination. The vice of fear had clamped my eyes shut. However, I kept my ears open. The silence was truly deafening, and I was left to hear nothing but my pulse steadily increasing. My breathing was heavy, and I felt as though I couldn't come close to sating my own need for oxygen. My mind began to race and wander. What if Sean was right? What if the witch was real? Before I could ask any more questions, I heard something that caused everything to come to a screeching halt. Rustling. Rustling through the tall grass, inching its way closer towards the center of the yard, and in turn, closer to me. My muscles locked into place, and no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't find the strength to move. My fingers were blanketed by invisible weights that I wasn't nearly strong enough to lift. I had learned in school that all animals had a fight or flight reflex, but they never teach the third option, freeze. I was frozen, in every sense of the word. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The only thing I could do was listen. I listened to the tree branch tremble as my muscles violently contracted over and over again, creating tremors that ran their way down my arms, to my hands, and finally onto the branch. My legs quaked, shaking their branches, and in turn adding to the rustling. I tried to quell it, take control of my own natural reflexes, all to no avail. I prayed to hear rustling through the tall grass again, making its way back towards its point of origin. I prayed that my ears had played tricks on me. My mind was playing tricks on me, creating terrifying things out of thin air. I have an overactive imagination. There's nothing around me. The only rustling I heard was from my tree. Everything was okay. I had no need to shake, to freeze, to keep my eyes closed. I opened my eyes and there was nothing, at least nothing yet. I scanned the ground beneath me, and nothing. You have pretty eyes. The gravelly voice came from beneath me, directly fucking beneath me. I frantically attempted to scan the ground again. I didn't know whether or not I even wanted to find the damn source of the voice. The rustling, the smile, all of it. What would I even do if I found it? How could I even escape? A flash of light hit my eyes, as a metallic whirring sound surrounded me, followed swiftly by rustling through the tall grass back towards the house. By the time my eyes readjusted to the darkness of the night, there was a line of footsteps stomped through the grass leading to the other side of the house that I couldn't see, and quite frankly I didn't want to see. Seeing my chance to escape, and refusing to stay around after whatever had just happened. Short of falling, I came down the tree as fast as I could, ran straight for Tommy, turning myself in. His gaze met mine. Both of our eyes were as wide as they could physically get. We walked towards each other. He tagged me out and brought me over to my teammates, who hadn't been nearly as vigilant. We never spoke of the flashes, and I never told him about the smile, the voice, or the footsteps leading behind the house. It was better this way. Years have passed since this took place. Sean moved away, and we eventually learned to love each other as brothers. And even though he still mentions being the older brother, nowadays it's much more in jest. Honestly, I had pushed this memory deep into my brain, and having never spoken of it helped keep it repressed. That was until a couple days ago, my 18th birthday. I had just arrived home from school, parked my car in front of the house, and went inside to change before leaving to go to work. There were a few birthday cards in the mail from various family members, and then there was one card that was different from the rest. There was no return address and it hadn't been postmarked. Where my address should have been placed on the envelope was simply inscribed my name. I opened the envelope, revealing a Hallmark card. The card had a birthday cake in the center with 2 children surrounding it, and written on the front were the words, "My, oh my. How you've grown!" I opened the card and 2 pictures had fallen out, but before I could pick them up, I saw a handwritten message in the card. "You have pretty eyes." I dropped the card and looked down at the floor to see what else came in the envelope. 2 pictures laid on the floor. One was worn out and crimping at the edges, and the other looked like it had been printed just a few days ago. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I was a kid stuck in a tree again, unable to stop shaking. I had collected myself just enough to pick up the pictures. The older one was taken from the base of the tree, and when looking closely you can see 10-year-old me, the camera flash having illuminated my eyes. The other had been taken from outside my work, and through the glare from the sun on the windows in the center of the picture was me. Story 9. Inside the circle. I like exploring. From state parks to virgin wilderness. I love going out and seeing things. I used to go alone a lot, just communing with nature and really roughing it. But thankfully on the day in question, I had someone with me. Jake hadn't wanted to go, had said he had a bad feeling about it, but I insisted. Jake is kind of a shut-in, and I thought that some fresh air and sunshine might help get out of his shell a little. Plus, it was spring, and who doesn't like to go hiking in spring? We were hiking in North Georgia, a state park I won't name so you don't go looking for it. It's beautiful out there. There's a river running through the gorge, places to swim and picnic, rock walls to climb if you're feeling bold, and lots of nature to commune with. We had come to the end of the usual trail, the river continuing on even if the marked trail didn't, and Jake looked at me oddly when I didn't turn around and go back. "I want to see what's up ahead," I told him. I had never been beyond that, but I had always wanted to. "No way," he said. "That's out of bounds. The signs say there are holes or unstable terrain." "So?" I asked. "So, it means it is dangerous. I know you're all about exploring, Chuck, but I'm not trying to die today." "Oh, come on," I prodded. "Just a little bit further. Don't be a wimp." He looked like he wanted to go back, but my heckling had gotten to him a little. "Okay," he said, "but if it looks bad, we turn around. Understand?" Yeah, I said, waving him off as we went past the signs and onto the unmarked trail. The signs were needless anyway, I thought. Georgia is swampy in some places, and sinkholes and subterranean caves aren't that uncommon. We'd just avoid the soft areas and we'd be fine. I had read online that there was a waterfall at the end of the trail, but I had never seen it. Some hikers said it was beautiful, and that it went all the way back up the cliff, which would be a pretty long drop for a waterfall. I wanted some pictures for my travel blog, and as we walked down the trail, I knew this was going to be a hike we'd both remember for years to come. I must not have been watching where I was going very closely, because all the warning I got was a little cracking sound before I was suddenly in free fall. I was watching the hole in the ceiling get smaller and smaller as I fell, and then everything went black for a little while. When I opened my eyes, that circle of light above me was more like a spotlight. I groaned as I tested my limbs, my back, and my neck, and found myself mostly in good shape. My head hurt, but my arms and legs still worked. I had fallen onto some kind of moss, something that had probably saved my brains from being splattered all over the floor, and as I lay there staring up into the ceiling, I saw a silhouette impose itself over some of the light. "Chuck, thank God. I thought you were dead. I'm trying to get the rangers, but I can't get a signal. You break anything?" I sat up a little, rubbing my head where a knot was forming. I felt a twinge of pain in my back, but nothing too bad. I was smart enough not to push it, though, lest I mess myself up further and unrepairably. I don't know. My back, I think. Well, that's better than most people after they fall into an underground cave, I guess. Unfortunately, I got all the climbing hooks and you got all the rope. I'm gonna head back up to the swimming hole and see if I can get some help. Hang tight. I'll be right back. Before I could say anything, Jake was gone, and I was left with nothing but the moss and the darkness around me. I didn't know how big the cave was, if I was in a cave at all, but the blackness seemed deep and impenetrable. As I lay there, the pain beginning to seep into my body, I thought I heard something. It was slight, no more than a tickle on the senses, but it was definitely something. It was like something with claws walking quietly on stone, like a rat but bigger than usual. I thought it was my imagination at first, but as it circled my spot like a shark preparing to strike, I realized I wasn't imagining it. I lay as still as I could, hoping that whatever it was would decide that I wasn't interesting or eatable, but when it spoke, I was taken off guard. It sounded like a woman, like a young, pretty woman. "Hello?" I stayed quiet, not sure what was going on, hoping it was a delusion or a hallucination. "Is someone there?" It sounded real enough, not like any of the voices I had ever heard in a daydream or a regular dream, and, despite myself, I decided to answer. "Hello?" There was silence for several long breaths, and then it spoke again. "Are you from up there?" she asked, and I assumed she was pointing to the ceiling. "Yeah, my name's Charles. What's yours?" Silence. Silence. And then it spoke again. "I don't have one. No one has ever called me anything." That was weird. I didn't know anyone who didn't have a name. It made me wonder how long she had been down here, and who had left her down here. Had she fallen into one of these subterranean tunnels like I had? Had she gotten trapped without a way out? I asked her, but after 2 long breaths, she told me she didn't know. I don't remember ever not being down here. It's my home, and if I lived up there, it was a very long time ago. The long pauses between conversations were a little weird, but I put it out of my mind. Clearly, she didn't get a lot of chances to talk to people, and she was just remembering how to make conversation. There was nothing wrong with that. In fact, I was glad she had found me. I didn't want to be down here all alone, and maybe I could help her get out once Jake came back. "Why don't you come over here into the light?" I asked, patting the stone beside my moss bed. "That way I can see you." Silence. Silence. Then speech. "I don't really like the light," she confided. "It hurts my eyes and it burns my skin." That made sense, I thought. If she had been down here long enough, then she was probably kind of sensitive to the light. I remembered reading about people who live in the dark too long and go blind when they take them in the sun, and I felt foolish for asking. It was really more my sense of vanity anyway. The idea that I might be talking to some old hag had crossed my mind, but she sounded young and pretty, and I guess I just wanted a look. "Is there anyone down here with you?" I asked, hearing my throat click as I said it. My throat was dry, and when I reached behind me, I felt for my water bottle and realized it had rolled off in the fall. I was thirsty, and I didn't know how long Jake would be gone. "Hey, you don't see a clear bottle anywhere in there, do you? There's water in it and I'm very thirsty." Sitting in the sunbeam wasn't helping matters much, and I was too scared to move to go looking for my sunscreen. I wasn't in a lot of pain, but they said that neck and back injuries could be exacerbated if you moved. I lay there, frying like a fish, and I just knew I was going to have a wicked sunburn when I finally got out of here. When the water bottle rolled out the darkness and bumped my hand, I had to stop myself from flinching away from it. I reached down, trying to move as little as possible, and as the water hit my throat, it was like pure honey. I splashed a little on my face, imagining I could hear the sizzle, and sighed in relief as I found some comfort from the heat. "Thank you," I said, looking at the darkness as if expecting to see someone peeking out at me. Silence. Silence. Then, "No problem. You're the first person I've had to talk to in a long time. I didn't want you to lose your voice." I smiled, glad to give her the comfort of a human voice. We talked a little. mostly involving me talking and her adding in things every now and again. I told her about hiking, about Jake, about the world above, and she seemed to enjoy my descriptions of things like TV and movies. For her part, she told me she had lived in the tunnels down here for a while, and that she could see in the dark pretty well. She ate whatever she found in the tunnels, and I wasn't the first person to fall in. That made me feel bad for her. None of them offered to get you out. You are the first one to be alive when you fell in. Some of them are alive for a little while, but they don't stay alive for long. No one comes for them, and they succumb to the fall. That gave me a chill. You mean they die? I asked. Silence. Silence. Then, yes. And no one comes for their bodies. Silence. Silence. Then, they do not find their bodies. I told you, Charles. I eat what I find in the caves. My mouth was dry again, but it had nothing to do with the heat. She had just admitted to being a cannibal, but I suppose one couldn't hold that against her either. She was trapped down here. Food was probably not plentiful. She had to survive the best way she could, but I couldn't understand how the park service didn't know people were going missing. How did they not collect the bodies before she got a chance to eat them? Did they just think people were lost in the park? I thought that maybe they should be a little more proactive, but then Jake's voice whispered in my head, like putting up a sign to stay off the dangerous trail. Were you... I tried to ask, but my tongue felt stuck to the roof of my mouth. Were you planning to eat me? Silence. Silence. Then... Yes, she said, not showing the slightest bit of hesitation. But you were alive and the sun was up. I usually don't find the bodies until after dark, so there's no sun to keep me away. That made me shudder. It isn't often you get to have a conversation with someone who's planning to have you for dinner. And if the sun had been down and I was still alive, I started, but I couldn't finish the thought. I didn't have to, though. Silence. Silence. Then, yes, she said. I was quiet, not sure how to answer, but she beat me to it again. I have to eat. Charles, all creatures must eat, and I am no exception. You don't feel weird about eating your own kind? I asked, trying to find the right words so she wouldn't be offended. Silence. Silence. Then, I do not eat my own kind. Charles, I eat people. My teeth chattered a little at that. Translation, she wasn't a person, which led my mind to ask the question I dare not voice. What was she? What was I down here with? Even if my back wasn't injured, even if I wasn't paralyzed, something I was pretty sure I wasn't, I still had no way to get out. I could no more jump 30 feet than I could have tossed Jake the rope, and I was at her mercy. It seemed she needn't wait until dusk, I thought, as I watched a cloud cruise across the mouth of the hole. If it started to rain, if it became overcast, even if some stray cloud covered my hole in shadows, it would be nothing for her to snatch me back into the darkness. It was a sobering realization to discover that your life was hanging so tenuously. Charles? She asked, and I heard that clicking noise getting closer. Charles, are you okay? I hadn't noticed until now, but her voice sounded artificial. It was like something approximating the sound of a voice, a speaker playing someone's voice from a video or something. It was a good copy, but I wanted to know what was making it. The longer I lay here, the less certain I was that she was a girl, and the more certain I was that I was talking to a monster. Charles? She said, and there was worry in her voice, as well as hunger. I'm here, darling, I said, making myself answer her. I was just wool gathering. I hit my head when I came down, and it made me feel a little woozy. The clicking came even closer to the circle of light, a circle that was, suddenly, not nearly wide enough. I do not know this word. Woozy. What does it mean? Is it like being tired? Yeah, I said. Yeah, it's a lot like being tired. I kept looking up. hoping to see Jake and the Rangers up there. How long had he been gone? It had to be at least a half hour. I couldn't imagine that no help had come in half an hour. Even if he had walked all the way back to the station at the trailhead, someone should have come back by now. I didn't know if they could stop her from dragging me off and eating me, but I hoped so. Charles? Yeah, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I thought it did. Are you afraid? I had to stop myself from answering with a Texas-sized hell yes, since that might provoke her. Nah, darling, why would I be scared? The clicking came up to the edge of the light, slow and unsure, and I imagined that I could see something there, just beyond the light, a face or something, and it did not look at all human. It looked like a bad driftwood carving or a strange idol from a heathen tribe outside of civilization, and I found it hard not to stare at the spot. Your heart is beating very fast. Your blood is pumping through your veins like a river. I can hear it. It's making me hungry. Are you afraid of me? I opened my mouth to deny it, but that was when someone called my name, and a shadow imposed itself across the light. It felt like too much, and I wanted them to move as they blotted out some of the light. Chuck? Jake yelled. Are you okay? Sure. Great. I lied. Glancing over to see the face I hadn't seen was gone. Someone else cast a shadow over me and I was shaking as my light was cut in half. Chuck, my name's Ranger Mike, and I'm here to help. Ranger Gabe and I are going to rappel down. Is your back or neck injured? I don't think so, I yelled, listening for the clicking and the voice of the not woman. I think I just hit my head. Mike talked to someone up there and they concurred. We're going to drop some flares down so we don't get stuck. Close your eyes. Okay. I nodded, but there was no way in hell I was going to close my eyes with that thing around. It was strange how quickly she had become it, and how little I wanted to bring her back up with me now. I had no idea what I had been talking to, and suddenly I didn't want to know. I wanted out of this hole, out of this hell, and I promised whatever was listening that I would never scoff at signs there to keep me safe again. If they would get me out of here, I might never come back to the woods again. The flares came down, and I saw the cave was much bigger than I had thought it was. The flares sent up a ghostly light, casting everything in flickering illumination, and that was when I saw it. It was only for a second as it retreated down a side passage, but I caught a glimpse of what I had been talking to. The driftwood carving analogy wasn't far off, the whole thing looking white and thin and kind of fragile looking. It walked around on these long, thin legs that looked like nothing so much as pure bone, and its eyes were set high up on its bony forehead. It looked at me almost apologetically as it left, but the two rangers who rappelled down never so much as glanced into the cave. They had me up and on a stretcher before I could warn them, and after securing it all to ropes, they had the three of us winched up as the flares burned in the darkness below. There were more rangers at the top, paramedics too, and as they got me topside, I was dragged to stable ground and checked out by the EMTs. They said the bruise on my head was nasty, but there probably wasn't any brain damage. My spine appeared fine, though they wouldn't know for sure until I had an EKG, and my neck felt okay too. Ultimately, they said I was very lucky, and I told them they didn't know the half of it. I'm in a hospital room now, waiting for my EKG, but I just wanted to get this down while it was fresh. I can't prove that it wasn't a hallucination. The ER doc said I was definitely concussed, but I think it was all real. I talked with something under the ground, something that would have eaten me if it hadn't been for the light encircling me. I was extremely lucky, in a lot of ways, and I thank God I made it out with little more than cuts and bruises. When, if I hike again, I'll be paying attention to the signs from now on. You never know what you might find just below the surface. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.